Not bad, how are you?
Well, and it's two, it's two students.
No way. That's awesome.
So we got, I mean, essentially. Oh, yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the study session for November 7th, 2023. Will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Mayor Hirschbeck,
Here.
Trustee Hardy.
Here.
Trustee Albrecht.
Here.
Trustee Ayers.
Here.
Trustee Kurtz.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Grace and Trustee Murphy are absent.
Thank you, Clerk. Okay, in the study session, it's supposed to be a more relaxed atmosphere. We don't allow general public comment, but we're gonna allow the public to comment on both the short-term rental regulations as well as the housing affordability. And this, with the study session, we won't be taking any action, so we might give direction to town staff, but there's nothing to actually vote on tonight. So thank you for coming out, everyone. We'll start out with short-term rental regulations, and this will be introduced by our town planner, Ton Hillenbrand.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, so Ton Hillenbrand, Senior Planner with Town of Berthoud. So before jumping into the topic this evening, or our main topic for short-term rentals, I would like to give you just a bit of background on my history and what I know on short-term rentals. So prior to coming to the town of Berthoud, as you likely may know, because I was a planner with Larimer County for the past 3 years. In the first 2 years, I was a development review planner, which is very similar to what I do now, so processing land use application and land use requests. And during that time, one of the most common applications that I received and dealt with were short-term rental applications. So I worked very closely with not only short-term rental owners, but also operators. And through that process became very familiar with the challenges and the complexities that are associated with short-term rentals. So after 2 years in development review and working with those applicants, I stepped into a long-range planning position. So working more with policy and regulations. So shortly after stepping into that role, I was tasked with updating the county's current short-term rental regulations. The year-long project was very complex. It was an extensive research went into the process, looking into existing practices, understanding pros and cons of allowing short-term rentals, and then extensive public outreach. So, and I quickly found that it is not a one-size-fits-all, and it is a very complex, as I said, issue to address. So needless to say, I am very familiar with short-term rental regulations, policy, and the perspective that many landowners, both short-term rental owners as well as adjacent property owners, and their perspectives on the topic. So I am happy to lead the charge for the town and to have this conversation with you this evening. So hopefully I can lend some background and some good perspective So certainly throughout this process tonight and while I'm discussing this with you, certainly feel free at any time to interrupt if you have any questions or if you'd like me to clarify anything that I present to you this evening. So with that, we can go ahead and jump in. So as the demand for second homes and short-term rentals continues to grow, many jurisdictions are working on programs and regulations to manage short-term rentals and achieve positive outcomes. While short-term rentals provide options for visitors and owners, short-term rentals could impact neighbors in which they are located with respect to parking, noise, and neighborhood livability and character. The Town Board of Trustees has expressed interest in further understanding the benefits and as I scroll, the negative aspects of allowing short-term rentals within town limits. Should the board decide to move forward with allowing short-term rentals within the town, developing a set of standards and providing oversight of short-term rentals may help ensure the health and safety of the renters while also managing impacts to surrounding neighborhoods. This work session is intended to initiate a discussion on short-term rentals and determine an appropriate direction for the town. So the purpose of the work session is 1, to discuss town's current position on short-term rentals, 2, to discuss most common issues related to short-term rentals and the common practices by jurisdiction to mitigate those issues through regulation, and then 3, to address possible options for the town regulations, and then 4, to hear feedback and direction from the board. So as the board is likely aware, the Town Development Code articulates allowable uses in the zoning chapter. Only those uses listed in the code and allowed in the zone district indicated are allowed in the zone district indicated. If a use is not listed in the code as a principal use or conditional use, the use is not permitted. So to give a little background on our current position on short-term rentals in the town of Berthoud. So a short-term rental is generally defined as a dwelling unit rented to guests for short-term lodging, which is 30 days or less, when not occupied by the owner or the operator. A short-term rental is an unlisted use in the town's development code and therefore is not an allowed use. So previous planning staff determined that a short-term rental, often referred to as an STR, so if you hear me interchange those, I do apologize. So previous staff determined that a short-term rental to be similar to an inn use as defined in the code. However, upon closer review of the definition of an inn, current planning staff has interpreted that a STR use is not similar to an inn and therefore are not permitted in the town of Berthoud. The development code currently defines and allows bed and breakfast use in current or certain zoning districts. A bed and breakfast is defined as an establishment operated in a private residence which provides temporary accommodations and which is occupied by the operator or the owner of the establishment. In recent weeks, staff from various departments have collaborated on communicating with owners of properties being used as short-term rentals. And as a result, a number of community members have attended recent Town Board of Trustee meetings to express their opinions on the topic, as you are aware. So before I move ahead, in my slides, are there any immediate questions on our current standing or practice with short-term rentals?
I'm actually curious if, I'm sorry,
Go ahead,
if you could clarify the difference between an inn and the short-term rentals so we can understand the differences.
Absolutely, and I do have a definition. So it is section 30-1-116A 208, which is our definition section of the development code. An inn means a building intended and used for occupancy as a temporary abode for individuals who are lodged with or without meals in which there are less than 12 guest rooms. I think the key component there to keep in mind is the intent. So the intend is the key word. Whereas with a short-term rental, the main and primary use of that property is as a single-family dwelling. So the intent is to house a single family. So it's first and foremost and will always be a single-family residence. Because even if in a situation where, say, we did allow short-term rentals, if they were to seek approval for a short-term rental, they could still inevitably use that as their private residence whenever they felt that or they wanted to. Whereas with an inn, The intent there is that first and foremost, it's there to provide accommodation to transient guests. So if that helps.
That's very helpful.
Can I just ask a clarifying question too on that? So, and that makes a lot of sense. So, an inn, just kind of by intuition, would typically be associated with some sort of non-residential land use zone, right?
Correct.
And obviously, a single-family residence is what, at least recently, is very common to be approved by the planning commission and the trustees. So.
Correct, yes. And an inn by definition is a commercial use.
Mhm.
So you would find it more or less more often in a commercial or mixed use zone districts.
Mhm.
Whereas a single family residence is limited to our single family residential zone districts. And often, of course, you don't see those in our commercial or industrial zone districts.
Gotcha. And that's kind of probably, is that the basis for the town's change in interpretation?
Yeah, and it was mainly that intent statement is that truly single family residence is intended to be just that.
Yep, okay, cool,
Yeah.
thanks.
And if I may as well, Mayor, one of the, I think, clarifying points about the definition of an inn is that even under the current zoning code, an inn is only allowed in an R4 district or in a commercial district. And an R4 is a mixed-use district that has a whole wide range of residential and commercial types of uses, but it's a very kind of specific, it's a much more broad interpretation of allowable uses than like an R1 zone, which is really primarily geared towards single-family detached homes and similar uses, right? So even in the context of what may have been interpreted as allowable for a short-term rental, still in most cases, including in the vast majority of the cases of short-term rentals that were operating in town, they were operating in an R1 district or maybe an R2 district, but an inn wouldn't be allowed in those districts anyways. Does that make sense?
Thanks for that.
Was there a definition of how many, like a minimum number of rooms or rentable units are in an inn?
So in the definition, it says, go back to that.
It's 12.
So yeah, less than 12 guest rooms.
I'm talking about on the lower end. Do they have to have like a minimum of 2 rooms? I mean,
Nope.
one,
Our definition doesn't, yeah, it does not.
so a house that's in a residential area or in a commercial area, could that be considered an inn versus a bed and breakfast or a short term?
And that would certainly be something, as of right now, it would still be a single family dwelling if it was permitted and constructed as a single family dwelling, went through and met the requirements for the international, the IRC for the residential code, whereas any kind of commercial as an inn would have to meet the, I believe, the IBC, so commercial standards. So there would be still a significant separation in how we would residents, even though in a commercial, which that could occur as a non-conforming use essentially, but it would still be a residence, and we would not define that as an inn unless they went through a process then to get approval for an inn use or to convert it, which of course then would trigger code requirements to bring it up to standards so that it met commercial requirements. So
There's
that would,
several old houses in Old Town along our commercial corridor. Kind of got meshed
Yeah.
into the commercial zone.
yeah, and so
because they've been
we
there
would see
longer.
that as a non-conforming
They've been
use.
used as homes or as commercial buildings. There was a doctor's office, therapy office, or dentist office, or
And you can see that certainly in older communities where, yeah, as things change and certain areas develop more towards a commercial, in that direction, you might find residences that are one-offs that still exist and can continue as such. But then it's once they go either out of that use and lose a non-conforming status, or they get renovated or go through an appropriate approval process to be converted into a different use, then you can start seeing that shift. Right, excellent. So many communities, both within the state of Colorado and beyond, have or are currently evaluating the benefits and drawbacks of allowing short-term rentals within their communities. Many northern Colorado communities, including Fort Collins, Timnath, Estes Park, and Larimer County, currently administer short-term rental regulations. The town has received feedback on short-term rentals consistent with what other communities are hearing. So through the process of developing or updating short-term rental regulations, common issues related to short-term rentals are consistently expressed by community members. Those common issues are as follows and can be found on the screen as well as in your staff memo. So number one, saturation of STRs in neighborhood environments, often referred to as density. Two is loss of sense of community, parking, trespassing, noise, parties and or events, and then enforcement. The overreaching concern, often expressed in many communities, is whether the use, often defined as a commercial use, is appropriate in residential neighborhoods or residential zoning districts. So some of the common trends and regulations. So many communities across Colorado face the challenges of determining how many STRs are appropriate for any given neighborhood or for their overall community. When updating the regulations, Landmark County heard extensive feedback from community members that their neighborhoods were being overrun by short-term rentals. Generally, neighborhoods closer to tourist destinations such as Estes Park were experiencing this challenge more than communities in urban areas. That being said, many other communities on the Front Range and throughout Colorado have also faced this issue and have implemented regulations to mitigate impacts, such as requiring a minimum separation or buffer between short-term rentals and residential areas, and maintaining a cap on the total number of short-term rentals in residential areas. The second issue, or issue number 2, which is the loss of sense of community. STRs, another comment expressed by members of the community is that STRs appear to have a substantial impact on neighborhood identity and sense of community. So long-term residents are replaced by transient guests that often change, if not daily, on a weekly basis. Over time, this may lead to a breakdown in the natural connections typically made between full-time neighbors and erode neighborhood cohesion. Additionally, community members have expressed concern that transient guests are not typically invested in the neighborhood in which they are staying, and as a result may dismiss basic neighborly courtesies such as respecting others' property, speed limits, trespassing, and noise ordinances. Loss of sense of community is one of the most challenging concerns to address through regulations. Jurisdictions that currently have short-term rental regulations tend to approach this concern in a variety of ways. The more common approaches include establishing a maximum occupancy limit per short-term rental, such as 2 total guests per bedroom, defining an absolute maximum number of guests that cannot be exceeded, such as limiting maximum occupancy to 10 total guests, limiting the maximum number of nights per month or per year the property can be rented as a short-term rental, such as 50 nights per month or no more than 180 days per year. Adequate parking or lack thereof is a common issue within neighborhoods containing short-term rentals. Many neighboring owners express that roads within their neighborhoods become congested with parked cars belonging to guests of the short-term rental units. Neighbors often report that this in turn leads to a lack of parking for the full-time residents and their guests and create safety and access concerns. Landmark County, Fort Collins, Timnath, and Colorado Springs, amongst others, require short-term rentals to provide adequate off-street parking to accommodate the permitted number of guests. It is common practice to see short-term rental regulations prohibit on-street parking. Many community members say that they see an increase in the number of parties and or events held at property used as short-term rentals. Typically, this issue is often accompanied by concerns about excessive noise, lighting for events, and parking issues. This common issue could likely be addressed in several ways, but the most direct would be to create a regulation that prohibits short-term rentals being used as an event space. Landmark County, Timnath, and Colorado Springs have language within their short-term rental regulations that specifically state that a short-term rental cannot be used and or advertised as an event space. So be it a commercial event or a large social gathering such as weddings. And lastly, a common concern amongst communities revolves around enforcement of adopted regulations and upholding owner accountability when complaints are received on a short-term rental. Again, this can be a substantial challenge for many communities to address. Oftentimes, verifying and resolving reported issues or concerns is difficult because staff who would validate these issues do not work evening hours or weekends, leaving compliance up to the property owner or to workday hours. In some cases, there have even been reports of adjacent neighbors taking enforcement into their own hands. For small municipalities with a small team of staff who may only have one code enforcement officer, such as the town of Berthoud, this can become even more challenging. How jurisdictions approach this common concern varies. Some of the more common approaches to mitigate challenges include the following. So this short-term rental is required to have a property manager within a specific travel distance and is required to respond to complaints within a defined time, often seen as 1 hour. The property owner is required to reach out to neighbors within a specific distance of the approved short-term rental and provide property manager information, and this is often seen as 500 feet or within 1,000 feet of the approved short-term rental. And the STR license is required to be renewed annually with confirmation that code requirements continue to be met. Require penalties or fines for violations, or alternatively, any violation of the code may subject the STR to revocation. Enforcement of the regulations is ultimately the administering jurisdiction's responsibility. Enforcement can become a substantial burden on the jurisdiction and warrants additional staff to administer the regulations, track and or maintain databases, and follow up on complaints while pursuing code violations. Careful consideration should be given to current staffing levels and the ability of the town to uphold and enforce regulations should they be adopted for short-term rentals. Only those regulations that are reasonable and necessary should be considered for adoption. The common issues just discussed should be considered by the board when determining if allowing short-term rentals within town limits is appropriate for the town at this time. After considering this information, the town board of trustees has a few options. So 2 of which are contained in the staff report, and a new third option has been created for your consideration since the drafting of the report. So since the drafting of the report, it has come to our attention that Colorado's legislative committee has begun discussions on a proposed bill that would impact short-term rentals in the state. Based upon limited information we could gather, the bill would reclassify short-term rentals as a commercial use, as they are currently considered residential, changing how short-term rentals are taxed. Additionally, the bill could restrict the number of nights per year a short-term rental can be rented. If approved, the Senate bill could impact the town's direction moving forward, and therefore we have created a third option that would provide staff time to watch what unfolds and come back to you in the spring or in the coming months, whenever the bill is either approved or shot down, with the best available data, and that would be our intent. So the new option has been added on the screen in red for your review. And should the board move forward with developing regulations to allow short-term rentals, many of the common issues discussed in the previous section should serve as the foundation for the town's short-term rental regulations at a minimum. So in the coming slides, I will provide some staff suggestions for regulations based upon those 5 issues we just covered. So issue number 1, staff would suggest that the board not move forward with a buffer or cap requirement at this time. Because the town does not currently allow short-term rentals, saturation should not be a problem currently. Developing and administering a buffer or a cap on the total number of approved short-term rentals would require significant mapping exercises and data management that is not currently in place. Adopting a buffer requirement and or a cap on the number of approved short-term rentals can be challenging to enforce without proper tracking. Additionally, this can require a significant amount of staff time to implement. Generally, this is not a one-size-fits-all standard. Issue number 2, which is loss of sense of community. Establish a maximum occupancy limit per short-term rental and define an absolute maximum number of guests that cannot be exceeded per short-term rental, such as 2 guests per bedroom plus 2, not to exceed 10 total guests. Limiting the maximum number of nights that the STR can be rented is relatively common. However, this has the potential of also becoming an enforcement and or tracking challenge, although less complicated than creating a buffer or a cap. Staff would suggest further discussion to determine if this is a logical approach to the town at this time. And it should probably be noted if the Senate bill, as I had stated previously, one of the options they are considering is limiting how many nights per year that the short-term rental could be rented. So again, that might be another good reason as to why potentially postponing to see what comes of that Senate bill before we move forward with any substantial regulation, if that's the direction the board decides to take. And then issue number 3, which is parking. Staff would suggest requiring a specific number of off-street parking spaces per the allowed total number of guests, such that 1 off-street parking space is required for every permitted guests. For issue number 4, parties and events, suggest adopting a standard stating that a short-term rental cannot be used and or advertised as an event space, be it a commercial event or a large social gathering such as weddings. And issue number 5 on enforcement, because the town does not currently have the resources to manage or enforce short-term rental regulations to the extent necessary, staff would suggest at a minimum adopting each of the approaches listed in the enforcement section noted previously in the staff report. This would include requiring a property manager for every short-term rental, neighbor notification of property manager information, annual renewal of short-term rental license and confirmation that code requirements are being met, and penalties or possible revocation for violations. Additionally, each property should be required to provide good neighbor guidelines to their guests. So next steps. Should the town board of trustees decide to move forward with developing and adopting short-term rental regulations, it should be acknowledged that drafting of new regulations could potentially take 6 months to 1 year to complete, depending on the complexity of the regulations as well as the desired level of public outreach needed throughout the drafting process. Multiple drafts of new regulations are typically required, each draft addressing the town board of trustees and or public comment. It is important that the board not only consider the benefits of short-term rentals, but also consider the potential long-term impacts that they can have on neighborhoods and the community overall. If the board would like to move forward with developing short-term rental regulations, staff will prepare a draft ordinance and specific code language. This may take approximately 6 to 8 weeks to complete or likely at this point 3 to 4 months considering the upcoming holidays. Once the draft is complete, staff would present the draft documents at future work sessions. Should the board decide to not allow short-term rentals and stand by the current municipal code provisions, developing a plan to assist property owners to phase out their current short-term rentals may be developed as collaboration efforts between code enforcement and the planning department. Should the board move forward with the third option, the new third option, allowing staff time to watch and consider state legislature before making any changes or decisions, we would update the board periodically and revisit the topic come spring of 2024. So in conclusion, the recommended actions are noted on the screen and in the staff report, with the exception of the third option, which is provided on the screen, and I can certainly read through that if you would like. However, that concludes my presentation, and I am available to address any and all questions you may have.
Thank you, Planner Hillenbrand. I do want to open it up to public comment, but is there any pressing questions by the trustees?
Curious to know if some of the other communities are charging, do they have like an application fee or a permit fee that's an annual fee?
I would say most communities, yes, throughout would have an application fee, and that does vary substantially depending on the municipality. I think I've seen communities in our mountain resort communities that charge a substantial amount just for the application fee. And then of course there's a renewal, and most communities that do an annual renewal will also have an associated fee with that renewal. Larimer County, for instance, they had an application fee as well as a life safety inspection fee, and those were required upfront as well as then in their new regulations requiring an annual renewal as well. Then inspections were then required every other year. So they did require fees with that as well, but I believe it is a common practice to tie
Dollar amount, what those fees range,
it.
250,
Some of it's-
500?
I have seen as high up as $1,200, and that was more or less, I think, Summit County, the Dillon Breckenridge area. Locally, anywhere from 300, yes, to 550. I'm trying to think, Fort Collins. I think Fort Collins is right in there in that fee schedule, as well as Larimer County, and I'm not quite sure, I can't say off the top of my head what Timnath.
Cause I was trying to calculate what it would cost to hire a part-time in addition to our full-time code enforcement officer, what those fees would look like in order to pay a salary for extra staffing to deal with this.
Yeah.
So I was looking at about $500 to $1,000 per permit.
And it is, I mean, it's a good thing to consider, cause it inevitably, it ends up taking quite a bit of time in the tracking and the enforcement, and anytime a violation or a complaint comes through, it does require quite a bit of follow-up.
And who does the inspections? Is there like a inspector you can hire in the county? Is it just town staff that goes out there and takes a look?
So for any life safety inspection, it would likely be one of our building code officials who would do the life safety inspection, so it would be very similar to what you would see for, you know, a building permit inspection. That would likely be the most logical approach.
I appreciate trustee Hardy's comment, and I don't wanna delay public input, but just teeing off that, does there exist, I guess, like a third party, like private entity that helps with enforcement? I mean, kind of running through the issues, enforcement seems to be one of the biggest hurdles a town of our size is gonna have. And so, much like engineering services or, you know, any other kind of services, a lot of times that can be contracted out, so I didn't know if that existed out there in like a consulting approach.
On the aspect of enforcement, I'm not sure. I'm not familiar if there are firms out there that would help with the direct enforcement. There are third-party vendors that actually help, who can help patrol different advertising networks, so whether it's Airbnb, VRBO, any of those, that do help bring unlicensed short-term rentals to the surface, and they sort them out, and then they notify the jurisdiction that here's your list for this week. Because often a new state legislature requires that you provide your license or your permit number within your advertisement. So that's a good mechanism for, you know, staff to be able to track to make sure if these ones that are posting and advertising are allowed to do so. So there's that component where they help at least sort them out, and so that you can get a running list of who may be illegally operating, and then you can pursue if that's something that was under consideration. But on the enforcement component, I'm not sure how that would look, and maybe Chris.
Yeah,
will
I
have
think-
already.
I think practically speaking, I'm not aware of any third-party code enforcement entities. You know, the company that we use for building inspection may offer code enforcement as well. Safe Built is a pretty large company that we work with here locally, and they offer a variety of services. Code enforcement may be one of them. I honestly don't know, but it's not something I've heard of.
Yeah.
Or that I've heard discussed. We do have, as you know, we have a neighborhood services officer who handles code enforcement already internally. She's pretty well loaded down, and we'll actually be suggesting to you in our budget that we add another position next year,
Just for our current needs.
just for our current needs,
Yeah.
irrespective of what may or may not occur here. And for round planning purposes, a fully burdened code enforcement officer is probably, with salary, benefits, insurance, taxes, all the things that the town would pay for is probably somewhere between $75,000 and $90,000 a year at least. So just for you to be mindful of, that's irrespective of additional expense that we might have with building inspection and those kinds of things.
That is a good perspective. And then I'll ask the first dumb question, just so everybody else feels comfortable. So Larimer County, obviously you gave the background of your involvement with that. They have regulations, and they all presumably also have enforcement. Not even saying I support this, but just as like a quick and easy button, could we opt into Larimer County?
Unfortunately, I don't believe it works that way.
Like the sheriff's department, we just
Yeah.
buy
Yeah,
in.
that was kind of thinking
Right.
that,
Yeah.
yeah. I was like, just have
That's
them
not a
do
dumb
it and-
question. That's pretty creative, actually.
We did talk about something similar, trustee Kurtz, you weren't on the board at the time, but we did talk about something kind of similar for oil and gas regulating.
Mhm.
And I don't know that we really fully explored whether or not that was possible, but there wasn't a lot of interest
Okay.
from any of the entities in doing that.
Mhm.
And for good reason, crossing those jurisdictional boundaries can be challenging, and as you know, we split county lines, and so is Weld County willing to do that on the Weld County side? Larimer County is not going to do that on the Weld County side, I don't think, and
Yeah.
it starts to create
That's
some
true.
very challenging jurisdictional boundary issues, so.
Yeah.
It's a great question though.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And in all honesty, Larimer County has a very hard time managing their short-term rental load.
Gotcha.
They have 3 code enforcement officers based upon jurisdiction, so there's northern, central, and southern.
Mhm.
And they're primarily, of course, as you imagine, most of their work are in the developed areas, and so, I mean, the county's quite large, but they have a substantial workload as well, and found that, in all honesty, through the process of updating the regulations and just how many applications, we continuously believe that we could have probably had an entire staff that was just dedicated to short-term rentals. But again, I mean, the population scale is significantly larger.
Yep.
But they certainly have their load.
And there are certainly areas of the county that are gonna have a higher propensity for short-term rentals. Like Estes Park is a really obvious example, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot higher likelihood that there's be a high number of short-term rentals just by virtue of the fact that the vast majority of their economy is tourism related.
Mhm.
And that's not the case with us, so I would hope and expect that we wouldn't see, a massive influx of short-term rentals, but I think as we went through this enforcement exercise a couple of months ago, we found about 30 plus or minus. If there were 50 in town, and they were rented out half the time, half the year, 180 days, every one of them at $300 a night, based on our lodging tax, is probably about $80,000 in revenue. So, that doesn't count any other application fees and things like that we might charge, but, just as some round numbers for you to consider when we're talking about
Yeah.
what do fees generate, I think Trustee Hardy was asking a smart question. Are we gonna generate enough revenue to cover the expense associated potentially with just regulating them? And is that worth it to the board?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just taking that, if say we have 30 rental units or short-term rental units, and say you need a half an FTE, that's $45,000. So you need $1,500 per single family, per short-term rental.
Each one
So-
would need to generate that much revenue through application fees or lodging taxes that we might levy.
Yeah.
Yeah, to just kind of cover that very basic expense.
Yeah, break even.
And the reality is, I don't wanna sound pro or con, I think there's some really important questions the board can consider. As you know, from a staff perspective, our job is to help you make good policy decisions and provide as much information as we can. To make recommendations where you want them from us, and then to take your direction and try to find the best way to implement that the most efficient way possible. So, realistically, we're happy to do what the board's desire is, as you are elected to represent the community, but at the same time, I think it's important to understand that there is direct costs associated with something like short-term rental regulation, like a half FTE. There's also the indirect costs of all the other people in the town that get impacted, right? It adds some additional burden to our finance department and to our planning department and to our town clerk and to myself in a lot of cases, right? So there's all these kind of indirect costs. They're probably a little harder to quantify, but that do exist, right? Anytime you add a new regulation, a new policy, a new process, there's some really obvious direct expenses, and then there's this kind of opportunity cost, and then it's gonna take up time from other people as well to manage those issues.
Mhm.
And if I may, these are great questions, and certainly we're happy to continue to answer as many as the town board has. I do think, as the town administrator, I'd like to suggest that as you hear public comment and as you think about this issue, and you guys have heard me say this lots of times before, this is true of every kind of policy initiative we embark on. but really consider why would we change our current policy? That's not to say that we shouldn't, but why? What's really the goal? Is it increased tax revenue? Is it creating additional lodging options that don't exist in town? Is it giving property owners more latitude to use their property for what they think they wanna use it for? I think there's a long list of reasons why you might choose to do this. If we have a good understanding at the staff level of why we want to do this as a community, it also helps us craft a better regulation for you the first time around, I think, to consider. And so we would certainly be appreciative if there was a really clear understanding of why it is we would do this in the first place.
I'd probably comment on that, just.
Do you mind if we go through public comment?
Yeah.
Just,
Oh,
I'm only asking this because I'd like to, I'm sure we all have questions, but that way we can answer some questions the public might have brought up, plus our own, and that'll save you 2 trips up to the front. Okay. This time we'll open it up for public comment. I don't know if there was a sign-up sheet, so I don't think there was, so just raise your hand and I'll call you up. And you can, oh, there is? That looks like an agenda.
There was no sign-up sheet.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Well, we typically offer public comment here, so I'm gonna go ahead and do it. If you come to the front, after I kind of point you out, state your name and address, and if you could please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Thank you. Is there one in the front here, ma'am? Sir?
I wanted to thank the Board of Trustees and especially town staff for putting together a very thoughtful evaluation of short-term rentals for the town of Berthoud. My name is Mark Driscoll. I'm at 321 Wood Street. I've been a property manager in the area for over 20 years. My wife and I manage rental homes on behalf of owners for durations of 6 months, 1 month, and even 7 days. And sometimes that's the exact same property. Many of the recent issues that I'm aware of have to do with poor management of the rental property and not the duration that the home is rented. You can always end up with a bad tenant, whether they're renting for 1 year, 1 month, or even, yes, for 7 days. Many of the concerns expressed by some of the neighbors can be addressed through proactive professional management practices alongside city STR taxes and regulation, much of which I'm in support of, and I'm in support, I'll say for the record, of what Ton just presented. There's many items in her presentation that I would support, not all, but many of them. Here are just a couple of the policies that we have currently in place to ensure problematic tenants are properly screened out well before they arrive. Every guest signs a rental agreement, acknowledges the home occupancy limits, parking rules, and our zero tolerance policy for parties and events. Violations of the signed agreement may result in immediate eviction, none of which you can do with a 30-day or 1-year rental. Immediate eviction under 30 days to deal with that issue, and we respond within 30 minutes. We require driver's license, credit card are collected from each and every guest. Door security codes are changed after every tenant. Parking restrictions and community rules are clearly communicated prior to arrival, not after arrival. And we are required to respond to any neighborhood complaint within 30 minutes and provide a contact information for all neighbors that are near the property. We communicate our quiet hours, our policy to all tenants, 9 p.m. to 9 a.m., and we post these signs throughout the home. These are just some of the good neighbor policies that we've implemented that have proven highly effective over the last 10 years and been developed over the last 10 years the hard way. So I'd be happy to share the full list of our good neighbor. We have a good neighborhood policy that we share with every community, and we encourage that it be publicized and reviewed among and passed along to anyone that is choosing to rent their home for 6 months, 1 month, or even 7 days. I want to say thank you again. I appreciate the opportunity to give public comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, right here. We'll work our way back.
Hi, my name is Mindy. This is Dave. We own a couple of townhouses at the TPC Heron Lakes, and we manage a couple other properties. We actually.
Do you mind stating your address, plees?
Sorry,
Do you mind stating your address?
my address?
Yes, your last name and an address.
Yes, Hughes, and it's 1520 Harebell Street.
Thank you. These are legal requirements for the
Sure.
court. That's why I'm asking. Thank you.
Absolutely. So we're the first in the townhouses to contribute to the short-term rentals. We were the first ones 3 years ago. We purchased the model home that was there. They leased it back from us and then we returned it into a short-term rental when we're not using it. And then we did another one after that. We were the first ones in the community. For 3 years, when we first looked into how we do a short-term rental in that property, we followed the guidelines that were set to us through the Metropolitan District. We had an annual fee that we've paid, it was $100, an application fee that we filled out. So we have done the process as they told us we needed to do to provide a short-term rental in the property. So we've paid that fee every year, we've done a renewal every year. And we've made sure that everything that Mark just said, that's in our guest book, and we provide that to our customers as they come in for the short-term rentals. This is our business as well as our homes. So the decision here financially impacts us greatly. We have bookings for 6 months, we have return bookings. We contribute a lot to the TPC community as far as we host people that do the wedding events, the golf tournaments, all of the events that happen at the TPC. We do not do events in our properties, to make that clear. We host for the families that do these events. Also throughout the community. So we contribute to the town of Berthoud because we advertise the restaurants in the town, the grocery stores in the town, the gas stations in the town, all of the businesses. We have all of those listed for our customers to contribute to your community and to the taxes and to the money that you collect. We feel like the privacy rights should supersede some complaints from the community because we address those. Just as Mark said, we are very, very hands-on on our townhomes that we manage. We address any concerns and we have done that along the way. We have implemented even more policies as the 3 years have went on. Parking, one spot, vehicles in the everything that Mark had just said. We provide tourism and attraction information for the community. We have local jobs, so housekeeping, maintenance, prepare people, things like that. We have we get out locally and provide jobs for community people here.
Madam Hughes, we've hit our 3 minutes here.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Copy that.
I
Thank you.
appreciate it. Next, we'll go over here.
Hi, and thank you for hearing me today. I really do truly appreciate it. Currently, I live at 3352 Donzante Bay Court. The next few days, at least. My name is Aubrey Larson. Actually, I grew up at 1110 Madison Avenue, getting ice cream at DCBY. I don't know how many of the board members remember that, or getting hot chocolate at Jumping Bean, but definitely been a privilege to watch Berthoud grow and change and adapt for my whole life. So, and the whole short-term rental thing has been, it's been a doozy, and learning a whole lot about it. With the experience that we had a lot of, I think, really mishandled things happen. I want to state for the record, I'm actually not here for myself or my family members at this point because we did shut down. We canceled all reservations. The house is currently on the market. They can't afford to hold it while things get worked out. So we've kind of shut the book from our standpoint. It was mishandled by a lot of different parties. I feel like there's a lot of things that Tom brought up that we should have definitely implemented in hindsight. Would have been really helpful, I think, for the neighbors and for us to have a lower cap on how many people could be there. The parking situation for sure. Have a really strict intolerance to parties and events. I think all of those things would have been really beneficial, but I was kind of new to it. Honestly, my husband and I did the managing. We didn't have the experience that maybe we should have had in order to manage that kind of a thing, but the neighbors knew who we were. It was our understanding up until very, very recently that there were no problems. Once we were informed that there were problems, we would have definitely adjusted that, but that doesn't really matter now because we don't have the opportunity to do so. It won't really matter because the home won't be operating as an Airbnb, so it doesn't really matter. But I've heard through this experience from a whole lot of people here in Berthoud that have been here a long time. Not, even beyond the TPC community that is kind of fresh. There's people that have been here a really long time that are very established in the town of Berthoud, know the town of Berthoud, know why they're accepting guests into the town of Berthoud, know why people should be coming here. And I've heard from a lot of people how much it's going to impact them. The stance that was taken with us for the cancellation with the 30 days and the impacts to my family members, that sucked. That's gonna suck for like a lot of people if you don't change that hard line. A lot of people having to cancel those things, it impacts a lot of Berthoud residents.
Madam Larson, we've hit our 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Sure. I'd give folks a heads up, but I don't want to interrupt you speaking. So I'll just mention it at 3 minutes instead of 2 minutes and 30 seconds, ma'am.
April Newhouse, 1503 Glacier Avenue, owner and managing broker for Newhouse Real Estate. So, it's been really good to see and hear everyone's very, thorough information with this. And I own an Airbnb in a different state, love my neighbors, and have implemented many very responsible scenarios, even though I don't have regulations in that town. I also promote tourism in that entire area as well to all my neighbors to help the small business owners there. I'm also extremely active in supporting Berthoud and small business owners in Berthoud. Many of you probably have seen me do that. One thing that when I was really looking at all the numbers, crunching budgets, I did want to make sure that there's the extra revenue that would be calculated when you're looking at that by the extra money that's being propagated, as we talked about previously, with the support staff that would be local, the extra gas, shopping, breweries, restaurants, and the money and tax revenue that comes as bringing in that tourism industry and people that are staying there instead of having to go to other towns around here. And obviously the lodging tax as well, that can be substantial. But the thing that I really do just feel like, because I know a lot of times this can just be hard or fast numbers that we're looking at, is the fact that on the positive side, how much it's impacting people, homeowners, families in Berthoud for the good in many ways, because it is very difficult for people to afford housing. The economy is challenging at this point. And so what it can mean for families, children, if they can have, better clothes to go to school with, food, medication. I actually know multiple families that are affected directly by being able to get extra income from doing short-term rentals in their properties. And so that's something that just realizing that you're supporting very family-oriented people within your town boundaries, and then they, of course, are able to then support the local economy as well. So there's those other things that you can't really put your finger on that need to be considered in this scenario. Also, as a realtor, and I work with a lot of first-time home buyers, and trying to help them at 7.5% interest rates figure out how to buy houses and get out of renting for $2,500 a month and to get into something where they can buy. Right now, we have lots of grants that we can help them get into, but they still have to make the payments for those things. And we just help someone buy a buy level, and they're able to do the income on the lower level that actually is $3,000 a month for them is what it's been. So it's almost covered their mortgage. So all of a sudden, they were able to get out of renting, buy a house, live on the main level, Airbnb the bottom level. They're almost covering their entire mortgage at this point, and they're also getting income by doing the cleaning, so that she can now stay home with her children by doing the cleaning for her income. So there's those kind of opportunities that are opened up as a result of it. I'm completely in support of having regulations that can help protect the neighbors so that those bad apples can be pruned and controlled so the neighbors can also be happy with the whole situation. And I'm more than happy to help when you get into an ordinance planning situation to give additional feedback voluntarily.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Next, in the front here.
Hi, I'm Nicole Clements. I live at 1269 Westport Avenue. I own and or manage 30 short-term rentals, anywhere from Littleton up to Fort Collins. I've hosted over 1,000 people. And just like this gentleman said, it's all about the management. So I've had no issues, but I vet people very, very closely. I have a list of criteria that I'm looking for. And I protect the homeowners and the neighborhood and the neighbors. And so I think the problems lie with like mom and pop people trying to manage these, and they don't have the experience that I do or he has. With hosting over 1,000 people, I've seen it all, I've experienced it all, and I know how to take care of, issues that come up. So I think instead of like just saying no short-term rentals across the board, I think regulations are very important, and maybe it is, that a property manager needs to be managing these, because we know how to handle everything. We know how to control noise because there are devices out there, there's technology that'll let you know, if there's too much noise. There's cameras that show you who's coming in and out. There's there's different machines that'll let you know how many signals you have in there, cell phone signals, to let you know if there's more people than you agreed to. So there's a lot of technology that you can implement to make this work. And the reason why I'm pro, short-term rentals is because I've helped people retire that normally would not be able to retire because they're making this income. I've helped single moms subsidize their income. I've helped moms stay home with their children because of this passive income. I've helped people move here, who normally wouldn't have a place to stay, because it's very difficult when you're a family and you have dogs to stay in a hotel. It's almost impossible. But if you need to get to know the area before you buy, you need a place to land. You need a kitchen, you need a washer and dryer, you need a yard. Sometimes a garage is nice too for storing your items. So it's just, and I've also, I house a lot of the Marshall Fire victims. I house a lot of the people that have flooding issues and, their insurance claim victims. So there's a whole slew of people that really benefit from having this as an option. So I just, ask that maybe you consider these people as well, and not just neighbors who, might get a little annoyed by transient people coming through. But again, that's usually caused by poor management. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much. Go in the back. Oh, start in the right there, ma'am, in the orange. Yes. Yep.
Ursula Albers, not a short-term rental owner, but a realtor in the Berthoud Residence, 165 Quandary Avenue. So my question is, how many short-term rentals are in Berthoud? How many complaints do we get about short-term rentals? And like this lady stated, obviously the metro districts are charging for short-term rentals. So my assumption is that in most HOAs, short-term rentals would be addressed, maybe. The other thing is, yes, there can be issues. However, if in this time and age, if you have a bad renter, try to evict them. Landlords, management companies, a long-term bad renter can be as bad, if not worse, as a short-term renter because they usually leave in 7 days. I would assume that anybody staying at a short-term rental, the owner or management companies, parking is provided. Usually those renters have access to driveways, garages. So I think the key is how big of a problem do we have? And then, all those who have short-term rentals, they do contribute to the community, and April said it absolutely correct. We have first-time home buyers that have, you know, sometimes friends and help to tide them over, and yeah, it's 7.5-8% interest rates, and if you buy a 400,000 home, your payment is what, 3,300, that's if you're not in a metro district. So it does help a lot of people as well, and safety and security should be always the first issue in any house. That's all.
Next, we'll go in, sir, yes.
Hello, my name is Chuck Ingerman. I live at 1600 Alpine Avenue, and I'm actually just in the process of possibly like getting my house ready for a short-term rental. So I'm a web developer here in town. I own a small business, so I kind of I'm familiar with management, things like that. So I think a lot of it is mismanagement. I've already started the process, talking to my neighbors. They know about it. They have no problem with it. I've already figured out parking. I know how many kind of rules. I looked at the entire rules of Liberty County, what that is. So it's going to help me to be able to kind of substantiate extra income for me as well, so I can, I'm a single home buyer. And so it would help me kind of free some money so I can start, building my own business, my web development business. I can free up with our income. So really, I want to do all my homework, and I believe in regulations. And I think it brings a lot of tax revenue. I know a lot of people would love Berthoud, so why not bring in that extra income? There's not a lot of hotels here, so I see a big benefit in it. And I just think, instead of just off the board, blocking it, regulation would be just fine. And I want to make sure I'm, helping the community grow in some way. So,
Thank you very much. Let's go in the middle there. We'll keep on this side, and then we'll move over to this side.
Clark and Chris Stace, 18519 Weld, County Road 5, so Berthoud address, but Weld County. And we are pro short-term rental. We could probably talk for 20 minutes about the positives, but we'll try and keep a couple of concise points just to mention.
So we started our Airbnb all on the premise of helping actually globally in Ukraine, and it was a way for us to generate money to send over there. So that was how we started, and just to have that opportunity. So that's kind of why we started our Airbnb 5 years ago. And I think Clark has some bullet points to address what Chris was saying about why should we consider
Right,
this.
the why really made me want to respond. Colorado's a tourism state. Do we want to be part of that DNA or not? I think that's kind of the question to ask, because obviously Airbnbs promote a lot of revenue because of that.
I'd say 90% of our people that come are tourists looking to come spend money in Berthoud. That's the first place we send them. And I'm so proud of our town. We've raised up 6 kids in this town, and it's and then a lot of people come because they have family here, weddings, babies, funerals, you name it, graduations. So we just need places for these people to come and be close to their family.
And building on that, I do believe it's very difficult to live in northern Colorado from other people looking to move here. It's expensive. I think it behooves the town to consider how to be flexible, and this is an option of flexibility.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Yeah.
Christy Petrowski, 2242 Breckenridge Drive. I do own an Airbnb in the downtown area and have heard from several of my neighbors, and actually had several of my neighbors book for their families. People have come in for funerals, weddings, just like Chris was saying. So I want to speak to that this, although there's opposition, majority of the people that I've experienced have been so excited to have options for their families to stay. The downtown area is really small houses typically, and there's not a lot of room for them to bring extended family in, so it does provide an additional housing for families in that area. Something I would ask you guys to consider is, if you don't allow Airbnbs, to recognize the cost of monitoring that as well. It's the same, you have to have a monitor there whether you have them or you don't have them. There's gonna be expenses on both sides of those. And to just really question whether or not the expenses are gonna be higher to try to keep Airbnbs from happening, or to regulate the ones that already have gone through the process, that have rules, that have regulations, all of that. But I just really wanna highlight the benefits for our town. I know on Facebook there was a big post, I'm sure you guys all saw it, but it was really, there were several people on there that said, you just do this because you're greedy. And I would just kind of want to speak to that, right? Because I have an Airbnb in town because I love Berthoud. And I love I know most of the owners of the businesses in town. And I want nothing more than to have a town that's vibrant and full and can function as a town. I've lived here a long time and seen business after business fail because there isn't enough tourism. Because a lot of people that live here shop elsewhere. But when tourists come, they eat here, they shop here, they walk the downtown area, they see it, and people who've come have loved our town. And what a gift it is for me to go, I'm bringing people in who will support my friends who own businesses here. And I'm bringing people in who love this town and can kind of experience a little taste of it. And we are very unique to a lot of different, we're not like a lot of other Colorado towns because we do have such a tight-knit community that it's a beautiful place for people to come and kind of experience what Colorado used to be in a lot of ways. The beautiful, family-oriented, tight-knit community that it still is. And I know lots of people are angry about growth, but the hearts of the Berthoud people make it feel like a small town, and I love that. So I'd encourage you to just consider all of that when you think about whether or not to have regulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else on this? Sir?
Here. Matthew Gavin, 3270 Donzante Bay Court. I was in my happy place today because I went back to your town planning document and talking about what a community we have and what community we want to be. And there was a survey taken to come up with that report, and 3 of the top 7 reasons that people love living in Berthoud: a small town feel, 68%. Level of traffic congestion, 67%. Overall level of safety, 54%. I live on the street, Donzante Bay Court, where there's been lots of issues, directly against all of those 3 things that we say are really important to our community. Again, it begs the question, why do we want to change? Now, having said that, I believe there is room for compromise. I'm not here to say we shouldn't have any Airbnbs, but if we are going to allow Airbnbs, they need to be very well regulated and it needs to be very well thought out. And I know there'll be a very long process where we have a chance to bring all kinds of input. I love the report that you put together. There was a lot of good information there, but I found 3 things reading through that I think we want to consider as we go forward. The first, I hear a lot about people wanting to rent rooms in their house for lots of reasons and how that's good for the community. I think an owner occupancy requirement would have to be part of any regulation. There's a big difference between somebody who buys a house and never lives there and rents it out as short term, especially when it's in a residential neighborhood, and somebody who's living in the home while people are there. Treat people like you want to be treated. Don't impose your external costs on your neighbors if you're not willing to live with it yourself. And from what I understand, most of the people that are saying I want to be able to rent are living in their home and are renting it out while they're there. I don't have a problem with that. But when we have people that are buying houses and just renting them out, that is clearly a commercial use and it should have no place in a residential community. In terms of enforcement, one of the things that can be considered is getting the platforms involved, Airbnb and VRBO and the others. New York City uses this approach. Their approach is that you have to get certified through the city to have an Airbnb. But when you sign up at Airbnb or VRBO, it is on those companies to call the city of New York, get a copy of the certificate. It's not up to the person who's going to be renting to do that. It's up to these big companies, and they're the ones who are penalized when there's problems. That puts the enforcement onus on them. I've worked in software my whole life. This is trivial for those companies to do. That could certainly be something to look at. So I want to consider that because there are going to be huge costs in enforcement if we decide to go down this path. I do want to talk a little bit more on the impact. There's a lot, the presentation by the city, there was a lot of just about what the impact is, the city negative. There's not a corresponding big body evidence of how it's positive for the community overall. I understand at a personal level and people's finances, and I have a lot of sympathy for that.
Mr. Gavin,
We need
we've
to
hit our
compromise.
3 minutes here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else on this side? Okay, let's move over to this side. Great.
Good evening. My name is Justin Davis, 1498 Harebell. I've been a Larimer County resident for.
Is Harebell, is that in Berthoud, or is that Larimer?
It's in Berthoud.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And I've been a Larimer County resident. I live in Fort Collins. I've watched the development of Berthoud, and when TPC came, I think to answer a few questions, I wanna talk to you real quickly about why we bought, why I think you should do something. Number three, a little bit about our experience who stayed and then the benefits. So real quick, I have been impressed with what Berthoud has done. And I think it's fair to say that TPC has changed Berthoud. And TPC is a new community. It's not a deep-rooted old community. So I think a lot of the comments from the previous gentleman about the community, TPC is intended to attract tourism and golfers from all over the world. So I think that's one thing. Number two is this is the only short-term rental that we own. And my wife and I, plan to stay in Northern Colorado forever, and we thought that this might be our forever home. So we decided to buy now because we thought that this is a great place to develop. We think the future's strong, the economy's strong, the tourism and the people moving in are gonna make Berthoud better. So that's why we bought. It's our only one. We stay there a lot, so I think the requirement of somebody to stay at the house is a little bit, I would suggest that that's a little absurd if somebody doesn't live there full time. So number two, why you should do something. I think the single biggest elephant in the room really is why should you do something is because there was representations made in the development and in the purchase of some of these townhouses in TPC specifically. And we paid a fee. And my understanding is that the Berthoud Heritage Metro District is a quasi-municipality that they were paid to look at the codes and to draft the contract and to take the money. So we applied, we did that, and that's actually a big reason why we bought. So that is a big reason why. Finally, a couple other things about who has stayed. Two of the tenants our first renter was in June. And so a couple of the people that have stayed are people that are moving here, looking for houses here that have either been building in TPC or buying in Berthoud, and they wanted their kids to be here prior to school happening and their house wasn't done or they couldn't find a house. They'd be happy to write letters to let you know. So that's a different experience. People are moving here. And then finally, the benefits of direct and indirect costs. People have already said it here, but there's also direct and indirect benefits and revenue. Personally, I have a business and I've done 2 events at TPC that have brought in $35,000 to the local economy, which that would not have happened if we didn't have a place to stay while we hosted an event at TPC. We don't put we've got a small place, it's not an event venue. So anyway, those are just some of but the big reason is there was, in good faith, representations made to a lot of us. So I think we absolutely do need to do something, and I am in favor of regulations. So that's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the side, turn the blue. Nick.
I'm not taking your place. Thank you for the opportunity. My name's Paul Hummel, and I live at 2774 Southwind Road in Berthoud. And we did purchase a townhouse at the TPC. Tried to do a long-term rental, did that. They moved out. They actually built their own place at TPC. We considered doing something different, and ended up doing a short-term rental for the last 4 or 5 months, and now we're dealing with this. I will say 17 years ago, I sat in front of this board, stood in front of this board. I think your dad was the mayor, and I argued in favor of the development of Heron Lakes Golf Course, and primarily for the economic benefit of Berthoud. And I don't know the numbers of Berthoud. You probably do, Mr. Kirk, but I would think that the town has brought in a lot of revenue from the real estate taxes, sales tax, and so forth. And so I would argue for short-term rentals so that to the other folks that made the point, this is a world-class golf course. It's a wedding venue. There are funerals, there are weddings and so forth, and there's not a lot of good lodging options in Berthoud. And so having a place to stay for 4 nights or 3 nights or 2 weeks or a corporate executive for a month if he's here on some sort of thing, I think that makes sense. That's all I have to say. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for your time. Next, yeah.
My name is Carrie Belcito. I currently live at 5401 West County Road 12, but my investment property is also in TPC. on Harabelle Street, which is the Berthoud Heron Lakes Townhome HOA. So my first point, I'd like to say, just like the last two gentlemen, we've been short-term renting for a short period of time. Of my 14 guests, 3 were there for a wedding at TPC, 1 CSU graduation, 2 extended work trips, 1 for the Corn Ferry Golf Tournament, was a player in his family, 1 for a softball tournament, a family from California whose daughter played in the Loveland Big Softball Tournament in Loveland, 2 family reunions not held at the condo, and 4 for others, and 2 looking for houses trying to move here. 1 I hope stays in Arizona because she was a pain in my ass, but the other ones are welcome to stay again and maybe move to Berthoud. I have lived in Berthoud for 20 years. I run a business here. I'm a large animal veterinarian. I bought my first property in 2003, which I still own as a long-term rental. So another point I'd like to make to the planning is I don't see long-term rentals specifically mentioned in the code either. So if you're talking about eliminating short-term rentals because the wording is not there, then we also have a problem with long-term rentals. And I will say my long-term renter currently is amazing, but I've had some bad ones, and I'd rather have a bad short-term renter that I can boot than a bad long-term renter in my other house. There is also very specific wording in the governing documents of the Berthoud Heritage Metro District, as well as the Townhome HOA that permit short-term rentals. So I think that's an issue, because many of us bought on that good faith that we could do that and have dotted our i's and crossed our t's. I even spoke to the town of Berthoud in February this past year and was told it was fine. So I also struggle with now the change. And I think that's all I have to say. I also was on the planning commission in Berthoud 18 years ago, so some of you are much younger than me, but some of you might have been around. And I do realize why Berthoud has gotten into the situation we are with housing because of how things were handled 18 and 20 years ago versus what the missions of the town are trying to do now. So I think it's, for those who oppose or wanna know about housing, I think it's important to speak to people who were involved in it that long ago, cause that's when it all started. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Morgan. I'm at 390 Welch Avenue, right downtown. We've got a short-term rental. We're primary occupants at our residence. I just want to say I was thankful to hear tonight, Chris, Kirk, your question of why are we doing this, and to have that thoughtfulness around how regulations are hopefully created. I kept thinking about the people not present in the room tonight. We're all, in a way, very directly affected, whether we're neighbors or we are hosts or property managers. But I kept thinking about our guests, the guests that we've hosted who come to visit family, who come for weddings, who come to visit grandparents, or they're here for graduation. And they continually express thankfulness and that gratitude that they're able to stay in town, close to family. Just an example, our last guest 30 days ago came from Indiana for his brother's 75th birthday. And he was thankful he could just walk 2 blocks to go visit family. And I think it's a really important thing that we don't have here in Berthoud if we don't have those regulations, is something in town where people aren't having to commute to Loveland or Longmont. They want somewhere in town to stay. So hopefully that's some food for thought, and hopefully that informs why it's important. It's some of the intangibles, like the money piece is very tangible for all of us, the noise is tangible, code enforcement, but the intangibles, it does bring a different value to town and for the family here to know that they can invite guests in town to stay too. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
And Ton, thank you, that was a really good presentation.
Yeah.
My name is Rochelle Schott and I live at 3300 Danzante Bay Court. And our court has had a lot of drama with the short-term rentals. My husband grew up in Kersey. We were gonna build a home on the dairy farm out there. We decided to move to TPC Golf Course. This was a great place. I have MS, he has a brain tumor. We have our lawns taken care of and all of those things, therefore not being in the country. Our lot lines are very close together there. When you have a short-term rental, 2 or 3 on your street, it isn't, you know, like it's in the distance, it's right there in your face. And again, I know that the one that, you know, had a lot of cars and everything, we had 26 cars from a Mary Kay convention. My kids couldn't even come to visit us that weekend. There was no place for them to park and they're like, we're going back to Denver. I understand that this is people's businesses, but we also looked into Larimer County if this was, you know, if there could be short-term rentals or Airbnbs were. And from our understanding, it was something that we didn't have to worry about. Otherwise, I would have bought in another county or we would have figured something else out. But, you know, we did our part in doing our research on that. And it has been a really hard experience. Again, you know, we're not well and it's a lot when you're having to deal with a lot of people coming and going and the cars and the traffic and everything else. If this was a business district, the TPC Golf Course, I understand what people are saying, but I didn't move there along with a lot of my lovely neighbors, you know, so everyone can have a business there. It's just, if that was how it was marketed, and I get it, we have a lot of people coming and going for these golf tournaments, but we bought there for the golf course too. We bought there for all the same reasons that, you know, people are saying they have their businesses. But you know, we do live there. And again, understanding, like I think you said it, like what's the goal? That's my whole thing is what's the whole goal? Are we trying to create more jobs for people to police all these things? But anyways, thank you for your time and
Thank you very much. You have another one over on this side? Okay, sir.
Ron Larson, 3327 Don Zante. Probably be the last time I'm up here, I'll just tell you that. I'm all for fair and equitable treatment, rules and regulations, but I'm also for equal fair representation and due process. I'll just tell the board, the mayor is the only one that listened to us and made a phone call after the meeting in September to the town administration to call me back to address the issues. Should be a way to work these things out, right? We're all people. We should be able to do that. Never got a call back. And I do know that the people that were complaining and so forth, they did get communication. So we're gonna be out of it, pretty sure, unless you guys act quickly. So if I can say anything, if the other short-term renters here have a complaint made by neighbors and they call you, address it, please talk to them because it's just not right. There's a saying by Josh Billings, he wrote The Kicker, 1880 to 1885. He says, I hate to be a kicker, a complainer. I always long for peace. Well, that's us. He said, but the wheel that does the squeaking is the one that gets the grease. It's not fair. So if the neighbors complain and we try to talk to the town, please listen to us. It's gonna come up if you guys allow it. Something's gonna happen where somebody's gonna communicate. Please talk to the people. We won't be around, but that's one of the biggest gripes I had is fair representation. Mary Kay, the convention was in Fort Collins. They stayed at our Airbnb and they had guests come over from the convention. Probably parking was a problem. Aubrey asked them to move the cars, but the convention was in Fort Collins. It was not here in Berthoud. So anyway, if I could just say, just have fair representation. If I call, return my call. I'm in a business. If I don't do that, what do I think about a person that doesn't return a call? The mayor, credit to him, he did. He met with us. So that's basically what I have to say. Thanks.
Yeah.
Stacy Evans, 3252 Danzante Bay Court. I'm just gonna touch on the Mary Kay thing. So it was a retreat, not a convention, but there was a lot of cars. And we did reach out on that specific one about cars parked. They did not move. She said they did, or she contacted them, they did not. I'm not sure, there were little kids going around. But the other ones were the weddings, the two weddings. We didn't know there was gonna be a wedding until they started setting up the stuff. And even then, we don't know there's a wedding. I can't see their backyard. Only one neighbor at that point could see their backyard. So we're gonna call them and tell them to come shut down someone's wedding that day. I don't wanna be that person to shut down somebody's wedding. That's their responsibility. It's not my responsibility or our neighbors to tell them, you got a lot of people coming here, they might be trashing your house. So they had to replace a whole bunch of stuff. That's not our issue to tell them what's going on in their house. We have no idea what's going on in their house, but we can pretty much gather what's gonna happen because there's so many people. This is a 16+ people bedroom where people can sleep. That's a lot of people. And he is selling it. And that was not our goal, to push all these people out of our neighborhood, but we moved there not knowing we were gonna have a hotel across the street. That's not what I moved there for. If I had known that was allowed, I would never have bought in that neighborhood. So there was a reason we picked that neighborhood. And like Rochelle said, we're so close to each other. We have such a tight-knit little neighbor street that we love each other and get along great. And we didn't get a chance to know the people across the street because they never moved in. This was never gonna be their home. This was gonna be a business. You know, and we met Lindsay after the first meeting, loved her, thought it was great. She has it in her home. She doesn't allow more than like 5 or 6 people in her home. She manages it. She's upstairs, they know what's going on. They're not gonna have all this going on in their home. And it's a commercial, residential type area. I'm all for that kind of stuff. But I definitely think there needs to be regulations. I don't think it should be right in the middle of a community like ours. The townhomes, that might be a different issue. And the whole thing was a cluster with the Metro. They did allow that. They need to work that out with the Metro and try to get their money back, because that was wrong. And I agree with that. But to have in our little neighborhood, to have all these big homes turn into Airbnbs, turn into big hotels, is what it turns into. But the ones that are owner occupied, that's a different story. Like Matt said, I'm willing to go with that one, but not the great big homes. Thank you.
Thank you. In the back there.
I'm Janine Weinzerl. I live at 3333 Heron Lakes Parkway, which is over in TPC. Since the inception of Airbnb in 2007, Airbnb hosts have earned over $180 billion. The average host in a year earns $14,000 profit. That's after all their expenses, everything. That's over $1,000 a month. They are operating a business, a commercial business in residential neighborhoods without a business license. If they want to be in the business of providing accommodations for travelers and visitors, they should think about operating a hotel or an inn that is properly inspected and licensed and managed. The second point that I would like to make is, if you look at the TPC community brochure, the website, every page of the brochure mentions the word community and neighborhood. When transient people live next door, that is not community and that is not neighborhood.
Thank you. Sir.
Thank you for your time tonight, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Kirk, Town Board. Tom, wonderful presentation. I'll make this quick. I don't want to yammer on about rules and regulations. I have no doubt that you guys will land with the correct decision. I'm in favor of Airbnbs in the community and VRBOs, simply based on property rights and the vision of what Berthoud could be. Berthoud is a chain.
I don't think we got your name and address.
Warren Turner, 3291 Danzante Bay.
Thank you.
We shouldn't get hung up on minor flaws that we encounter today as Berthoud grows. The town's constantly changed. I've been a part of it for the last decade, and I'm sure you all have seen it. We shouldn't set rules and regulations in place today that inhibit growth in the future. As someone who's actually looked at doing a hotel, there's capital restraints. If you really dig into the finances, Berthoud loses so much money in terms of sales tax leakage on restaurants and lodging to other communities. We should emphasize private property rights and not give up freedom for a sense of security in the short term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Clerk, do we have anyone online? All right, well, thank you everyone for speaking your opinions and your experiences and being so respectful, most of all. And we'll definitely be taking these into consideration. Apologies if there's any misspellings in your name. Usually we have these written out, but our clerk will go through the tape afterwards and make sure, we'll try to get spelling of your names as clear as possible. So at this point, we'll bring it back to the board here for a little deliberation on this and staff's options. There was one question in here, Administrator Kirk, that I want to clarify. How many rentals were there in town previously, and then how many how many complaints?
I think we sent 32 letters, is that right? I don't know exactly off the top of my head how many complaints that we get on a routine basis. The number is small.
Okay, thank you. All right, this time I'll open it up for the board for any questions. It's not a public hearing, so any comments too, but if we have any questions for Ton or anyone on staff.
Did staff get a chance to look at the link that I sent them about the company that helps track and sort all the Airbnbs that I saw at CML in May?
Trustee Hardy, I did have an opportunity to look at it, and I believe it is similar to what I was speaking for beforehand, the third vendor part, or the parties that are out there that help with managing and tracking for the enforcement component of that. So I think it was similar to what I've seen.
Okay, but are you guys gonna do a demonstration with them at all, or?
We haven't gotten anywhere in the conversation on that, but yeah.
Cause it was a pretty interesting product, and I think we do have more than 30 Airbnbs operating based on what I saw from his presentation back in May. So it was pretty eye-opening about all the benefits, the pros and cons, and helping us maintain and building the policy on that, so.
Something to
I think
certainly
it'd definitely be something to
keep in mind, yeah.
put at the top of the list for this community forward.
Hildebrand, do you mind, or mind putting up the options again? Recommended options by staff? We had different approaches, different regulation options, and then moving forward options, is that correct? I guess we can start wherever you'd like.
And I'll just summarize briefly, I think what we see as the options. One is to not do anything and to continue to take the position as the town that short-term rentals are not allowed in our land use code. The other option is to develop regulations to allow them. And I think we have a pretty good handle on what those probably should look like. I think you've heard a lot of good ideas tonight. Ton obviously has a lot of experience, having just gone through this very extensive process in Larimer County, and I think we can put together an ordinance that, as she mentioned, it'll take us a couple of months to get that put together and make sure legally it's all, we address all those concerns and issues. But we've got a lot of good examples locally and regionally, so we don't have to. We're not reinventing the wheel here, and I wouldn't suggest that we do. These are common problems across communities all over Colorado and the country, so a lot of these issues have been dealt with. If there are issues that we have not identified, Ton covered some high-level issues. I think there's a lot of specifics you get into once you start to decide how to deal with each of those issues. But again, I think there's some really good examples. It shouldn't be that hard to at least prepare something for us to then consider and work through. But we can go ahead and prepare that and come back to you after the first of the year with something to look at. Or the third option was hold tight, see what the state does at the legislative level and how that may or may not impact future regulatory guidance, and make a decision after the state has done something or not. That does kick the can down the road, and the state may not do anything, or the Senate may pass some legislation that doesn't get approved in both houses and signed by the governor. And so, I think there's some risk in waiting, but there's risk in adopting regulations that very well may not be applicable in 6 or 8 months if the state adopts things that are contrary to what we put on paper. So those are really the kind of the three primary options.
Trustee Ertz, you have-
Yeah, on that note, and I don't know if you guys can answer this because of that reason, but the preliminary bill, or at least the preliminary information from the bill, if it were to be released, do you foresee what kinds of things would be in the bill? So if you guys did work forward with a policy, could you kind of best practice work around those more probable aspects of the bill versus not? Just basically so that you wouldn't be wasting your time if you did come up with a policy and then the state says you can't do X, Y, and Z, and well, now that everything that you guys put together was based on that.
I think there's two ways to look at that. I think the short answer is yes, we can try to predict as we follow that legislation, as it moves a little farther along, assuming that it does through the legislature. I think it's relatively easy to kind of try to assume what the ultimate outcome might be. You know, as you know, there's these legislative processes where, you know, bills are adopted in both houses and they go to kind of a conference committee where they work out the details and then ultimately maybe approve a final bill. And so sometimes through that process, things change, sometimes even really dramatically, as they get to a compromise. But a lot of that'll be running in parallel with whatever policy process we're working on. As Ton mentioned, I think it's important that we understand this isn't something that will just change in 30 days, right? Like, we're not gonna bring back an ordinance to you that everyone will agree on in short order. And I think you heard it a little bit tonight, right? And I think everyone has a position about what's appropriate and what's not. How many people should be allowed to stay? I think there's a broad range of what individuals in the community might be comfortable with. You know, should people be required to live on site, and you know that manage these properties, or is within 30 minutes fine? You know, I think there's all those real specifics that when we actually get into writing an ordinance, we can propose something to you as a starting place, and I think that's important, right? You got to kind of throw the spaghetti on the wall and then work through what does that really mean, and which pieces are you okay with. But I think we should all understand this is not going to be a quick process. That's just the nature of how these things go. I think we all recognize that. And so again, I think there's some time to consider the state legislation in parallel with whatever we do.
Has town staff communicated with any of the HOA or the Metro District boards?
Not formally, no. I mean, we've had some, no, not at all, really, I guess. We've talked to folks who have said they've talked to their HOA or Metro District boards, and they're kind of a conduit between us and them, but we have not had formal conversations with those Metro Districts.
Can I make a comment?
No, I'm sorry. It's back to the board.
So I'm assuming Tani and all that would be communicating with those boards as well, because those boards have the full right to go above beyond our rules or regulations, they just can't go below it. So even though we have the rules saying no short-term rentals, they can't say, oh, well, we're gonna allow them anyway because we're a Metro District.
Yeah,
But they can add additional rules on top of what we make to refine whatever we do. So even if we had the most basic system, they can then decide to either add more or eliminate them themselves.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, and I don't honestly know what Metro Districts and HOAs may or may not have legal authority to do in this particular instance, but in general, we can allow something that they can also prohibit, but they cannot allow something that we prohibit.
Just wanted some clarification on that for some of the residents that are living in those districts, how they can, if we make a decision here, how they can then add on to whatever decision we make.
Right. I
But they
think
can't go below.
neighborhoods, HOAs, Metro Districts still have the ability to kind of manage their own, you know, at least within the scope of the authority that they have, manage their own communities. What that does, in reality, it leaves out older areas of town that don't have HOAs or Metro Districts to be kind of at the whim of what everyone else chooses to do. So for instance, if every HOA and Metro District in town decided to prohibit short-term rentals and we decided to allow them, that would mean they would all get concentrated in the older areas of town. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. It's just something that, you know, could happen. Is it likely to happen? Probably not. But that's something I think you just should be mindful of.
So for some of the homes that we have in commercial districts that are zoned commercial, could those places qualify as an inn with non-resident?
I think,
Or would it have to be a bed and breakfast, which is still resident? There are some like weird fine lines on some of those definitions, and I mean, it's only a couple, so I'm trying to think, there's only, I know of at least 3 that would be in that category, but they're
So,
not really neighborhoods
if
or.
an Airbnb is an allowed use in their zoning district, they can go through the process today to get that approved through our typical land use permitting processes. An inn, from our perspective, wouldn't really help the vast majority of these cases because the definition of an inn, as our code is currently written, is a building or structure that was intended for use as an inn. And our position is that single-family houses were not intended in their construction or their permitting from a building code perspective to be commercial use in. And so we still believe that wouldn't qualify in this category. And in reality, I think it's important to say previous planning staff did not take that approach. And the reality of every code is that there is some interpretation that needs to be made. But again, even an inn would only have qualified in an R4 or a C1 or a C2 zone, not in R1, R2, R3.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, so, in our commercial zones.
But I think our position from a staff standpoint, and I think that interpretation is appropriate, that houses are not intended to be used as inns when they're constructed. And so I think that would require a little bit different process than an inn, which is just a small hotel.
A bed and breakfast.
No, a bed and breakfast is unique in that the owner lives on site.
Okay.
That is a very specific part of the bed and breakfast definition, is that it is an owner-occupied structure where rooms are rented out. Is that,
That is
am I
correct.
saying that right, Tom?
And those are allowed in certain areas.
Yeah, and certainly if there are individuals, and I think some individuals this evening spoke to having some portion of their residence rented out on a short-term basis while they are residing on site, so whether that is like a split level and they're upstairs and they rent out the bottom, as long as they are on site with the guests, there's clear transition between one unit to the other, so it's not like a completely separate unit in the basement or what have you. That could by definition be a bed and breakfast, and so they could potentially, depending on their zoning district, they may already have an option moving forward, so that they are certainly welcome to reach out to us and we can discuss those options as they could get approval for a bed and breakfast use and move forward. It's when it's a clear, either they are not residing on site or there's clear separation, it becomes a short-term rental, and that's the challenge.
Just right now, the only short-term rentals that would be allowed are those that are actually living on the premises.
Right, and that would be defined as a bed and breakfast
So like
and
the
not
examples that were
short-term.
brought up tonight where they're renting out their third tri-level,
Correct.
that would be an acceptable use because they're living on site.
Yes, as long as the zone district allows it, there could potentially be a path forward, so whether that's site plan review or conditional use approval, they certainly may have a path forward currently under current regulations.
Cause I know of several houses in the Old Town areas that have like built what they call mother-in-law apartments above their garage, or they actually turn their garage into a rentable unit, but they're still living in the main house, or they're living in the unit out back and renting their house, sort of thing. I've seen.
And then that becomes more complex when you have something that's like a mother-in-law suite, which is defined as an accessory dwelling unit. So it is completely separate from the single family dwelling. So in that case where it's located over a garage and say in the backyard and the family is residing in the primary residence, I think there might need to be some conversation that technically they're not residing in the same dwelling unit because they are two separate. So we would likely still see that they are still in the same property. However, how the definition is stated
It's actually
is
dwelling
that
unit.
they are in the same accommodation as their guests.
So run a 2x4 for both buildings and connect them.
And I think the other thing that should probably be of consideration in that perspective, especially on the case of affordable housing or housing opportunities, is that, moving forward, something to consider is if we move forward with adopting short-term rental regulations, do we want to allow accessory dwelling units to be rented as a short-term rental?
'Cause
Or
that's-
or do you want to maintain those as housing for those who want to be permanent residents in the town of Berthoud, who work here, who would like to live where they work?
So that is something also to consider and keep in the back of your mind moving forward is, should there be a regulation that says, you know, unfortunately, we don't allow, you know, short-term rentals in ADUs. And many communities do clarify that, and Larimer County is one of them, is that they make it very clear that accessory dwelling units cannot be used as short-term rentals. Because again, it provides housing, because the reality is, affordable housing and providing adequate housing for first-time home buyers or, you know, those who are new to the workforce. Unfortunately, short-term rentals, that's one of the things they do, is they do remove those options away from renters who would love to live here but unfortunately can't because those units may be rented out on a short-term
That's
basis.
definitely something I was gonna bring up in our next
Yeah.
topic, cause has some pretty neat examples of those uses up in certain communities throughout the state.
Yeah, it seems like, so with that, on that note, there are people in this room that are in that situation. And if it's, we need to tease those out, is that something the board needs to work on, or is that something, but it's gotta be some transparency here that who do they go to and under what conditions? So do we, if you have a basement room and it was renovated and you put a lock on it for privacy, but you're on site, do they go approach you guys? Okay.
Yep, absolutely. They can give us a call, they can give me a call, and we can have that conversation and sort out, is this looking like a bed and breakfast?
Okay.
Or is this truly two different units? And oftentimes, absolutely, we understand that there is some level of security and safety for the family who's renting out the unit as well as the guest. And so we understand that, you know, it may be that there's a family living on the first floor and then they have a basement, and of course they just have a lock on the basement door. But that's still considered the natural living space to living space, or what is considered conditioned space to conditioned space. And so if it's necessary or necessitated, they can easily leave the basement and go upstairs. And so we understand though that you put a lock because there's a safety concern and they might go out and exit to the outdoor. But we would likely consider that a bed and breakfast use as long as they're residing on the first floor. It's when there isn't that clear transition where you can't easily move from conditioned space to conditioned space that's the defining line. But yes, they are welcome to give me a call.
Just Zorselli?
Yeah, I just have some thoughts I wanna share, before addressing.
Albrecht, my bad.
It's okay, Sorcelli Albrecht, actually, we could say Albroselli in my house, 'cause now we're blended. So, I just kind of wanna address the courage of the people that came tonight, because the fact that there is so much passion in this community for whether it's to have, you know, good policy in place and regulation or great business structure, all of you have a stake in this, and I'm grateful. And if we didn't have this kind of feedback, we can't create good policy. So I'm appreciative. I'm concerned that we implemented I'm concerned we implemented a cease and desist without community conversation first. Not that we wouldn't have had to anyway, because our code it's not in code or policy to have Airbnbs. I think it's understandable that there's frustration if there was some blindsiding, but I think that it's helpful to understand that it's the role of the staff to implement our code, and it's the role of leadership to implement good policy. And so the reason we even have a study session tonight is because we heard the outcry of the community, whether the concerns if you live next to an Airbnb or whether you are operating as one and you want to continue to. So that's why we're here tonight, is we want partnership with you guys to build a great policy, whatever way it goes. I, for one, am hugely in favor of bringing more tourism to Berthoud, but in a way that protects the safety and security of our current residents. And so I think the more conversation we could have, the better. I'm still concerned that we implemented something. We didn't implement it. It was already in place. That the communication, we didn't even know what the policy was until there was an issue. And so we're all growing and learning about this together. And I think the thing that I'm struck by is that we need to recognize that there's already an active business model going on in town. And so if we could work with our community to make that work for us, we're probably in a better position than to work against the community But I wanna encourage the community that our staff prioritizes the standards that we set in our strategic planning sessions of the sorry, my brain is like
Small town
tired.
feel, yeah.
I've been up too long. We put a lot of standards in place every time we meet as a new board of what our community is supposed to look like. And so honoring the citizens that are here is a big deal to our staff. And so when there's concerns that come to them, it's their job to act, and then it's our job to set into place policy, but it does take time. So we need some partnership from you guys on how we can move forward with good structure, and not go through it too quickly so that we cut any corners. Does that make any sense?
Can we put those regs up, those options?
There's also a paper copy on the dais with the
Ah.
three options needed.
Paper copy on the I don't have one. Oh. I wrote all over mine.
Mayor Karsbeck, if I may too, I just want to point out, one of the things that, this issue came to a head very quickly. We have shut down short-term rentals over the last 6 years when they've been operating in an R1 zone. Those have typically been on a complaint basis. Some of the trustees that have been here a little longer may remember the former owner of the Berthoud Inn came several times with a binder of properties that he had scouted out and said, hey, these are all operating illegally in town. We dealt with those at the time. It's not something we've ever done on a proactive basis, and at the time, there'd be 4 to 6. And I think that the issue has really come to a head in the last couple of years because the number has increased substantially, and because we had a handful of really significant issues. And it's important that I appreciate the way that Trustee Albrecht expressed it, and the staff's job is to implement the codes that are in place. And we don't really have the flexibility or the authority from you to waive codes. There's some nuance in every code choice, and then there's a nuanced approach to enforcement in a lot of cases. Because our goal in most instances where the code allows for something is to help people be in compliance with the code. The struggle that we had in this instance is the code doesn't allow for what we're talking about. And so for us to try and help someone through a process that doesn't exist is impossible. So I certainly appreciate the way that you described it and your perspective, and as we have or develop regulations, it'll be very simple for us in the future to deal with issues as they arise. Will be simpler. I wouldn't say that it's going to be very simple, because code enforcement issues, regardless of if it's short-term rentals or barking dogs or accumulations of junk and trash, all of those things are challenging at best in order to work through enforcement. It's very rare that we contact a property owner who's in violation of a code and they go, oh, my bad, and it's all fixed in a week. That's very rare, but it does happen, so I wouldn't say that it never does. But at least we'll have the tools to deal with it.
I think you made a good point that it's not the role of staff to give special accommodations or concessions to policies or code. It's there to keep public safety and keep structure and regulation. But where those things change are here in this room, because we represent the community and we represent those voices and listen. And so I think I don't want the public to have any confusion about where to take those concerns, because they can take them to you, but you're not gonna give variance to special cases, because that wouldn't be fair. That wouldn't be fair to, that wouldn't be legally fair.
And there's an extra nuance to this too, that they were not allowed, but we were not enforcing to the degree that I think there's a lot of folks in this room pretty surprised. And that's something we have to acknowledge too, that in my opinion, there wasn't some feeling of operating under the radar. So we have to be receptive to that fact too, that we knew people operating. So it just makes it extra difficult here that we're not, like, why would we want to change it? Well, de facto, we've had this change for better part of a decade. It's just we're now starting to enforce it, which I could see be frustrating for people owning one or operating one, especially when your metro district takes your check.
No, we aren't just doing
Yeah.
it, like Chris said, we've been doing it here and there, just not as broad as we did recently, because it was.
I don't think we've, okay, well, I don't ever remember having a discussion other than our board retreat asking to start developing it. But I'm not saying, you know, shame on staff. There was previous staff members, there's a lot of, this has brought some stuff to light that I think we would have done in a year now anyways, because we wanted to have this conversation. I'm just saying we need to be cautious of people feeling like they were operating under the radar, but it didn't seem very clear that we did not allow them. And now this point's been brought up about long-term rentals. I think that's something we need to look into too. Is that
No, for what it's worth, I don't think that those two things are even are the same, and that's not the case really anywhere in Colorado. Short-term rentals and long-term rentals are not classified as the same land uses anywhere that I'm aware of. And there's obvious reasons for that. A long-term rental is very clearly a residential use, and the way that it impacts the neighborhood. Now, 30 days, I will readily admit personally, I think 30 days is not really that different than 7.
or a month by month lease? Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, in fairness, I wouldn't say that practically speaking, they're that different, but legally speaking, I think it's been pretty well established in Colorado and around the country that 30 days is typically the threshold. There has to be some threshold, right? And what's the difference between a short-term rental and long-term rental? But 30 days is really the standard everywhere, and in general, short-term rentals are classified as a business or a commercial use, and long-term rentals are classified as residential land uses. So that's why we don't regulate long-term rentals, because they don't change the underlying land use of the house.
So I've got a question on the policy itself. Basically, people had called in, talked to different staff members about our policy on it. There was kind of a consensus that sounded like there was no policy, but yet there was one because it was on the webpage someplace. How many policies does the town have that's not actually in our municipal code?
Again, I would say that we didn't have a policy. It's not that we had a policy, it's that we didn't have a policy. I think those are two different things.
Well, just someone, there's a section on our website that goes in and defines inn and bed and breakfast, and that it was like a page that.
Yeah,
kinda talks about the whole
are you talking
short-term-
about our municipal code?
No, I'm talking about our website.
Yeah, so we had previously,
Yeah.
we have created a handout.
Yeah.
So just a helpful handout that says, here's the difference between, you know, what a bed and breakfast is, and here's the inn definition, and these are the zone districts in which these are allowed. That was an intent when this first started coming to head, and to kind of go back to the question about the metro districts and reaching out to a metro district to provide some clarification. The Heron Lakes Metro District, which I do apologize, I don't recall the name of that specific district. I know it was under previous management and then has recently changed. And they became aware that what they had been allowing was actually in conflict with our regulation or the policy that we don't allow short-term rentals. And when they noticed that, they took immediate action as they were in the process of, I believe, sending out renewal letters to property owners saying it's time for you to pay your check and what have you. And then they recognized that was an error because we don't currently allow short-term rentals. So there had been that conversation. We had some, one of the representatives, I unfortunately blanking on a name, but we did have some conversations and clarified. And that went back to the Metro District and they dispersed that information. So that is one Metro District that we've had some limited conversations with. And so I believe that's what some of the individuals tonight were speaking to, is that they were led to believe in their
Right.
Metro District it was allowed, but.
Yeah, Pinnacle, and then
Yeah.
Pinnacle got
Yes,
kicked out.
Pinnacle, that's it.
And, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
Tom.
go ahead, Chris.
I was just gonna say the handout, I think that you're referencing, doesn't explain a policy, it explains everything we've talked about tonight.
Okay.
Here's what a short-term rental is, our code is a permissive code and it's not permitted. Here are some similar land uses and where they may be allowed. And there is a note on that handout that says, this handout doesn't substitute for codes and regulations and it's still your responsibility to come in and make sure that you're in compliance with the town's codes. So, I don't think that handout's confusing, but if it was,
No, it's pretty well,
yeah, yeah.
well explained. It just seemed like, okay, we had this information. What was
And
it?
that's something we put together relatively recently in response to a lot of the questions we were getting. So, you know, again, we didn't have a document that said, here's our short-term rental policy. There was no policy.
I didn't hear anything about I think you brought up a lodging tax. If you guys consider that as part of going, if we do go forward with regulations, you'd be taking that into consideration. So we do the application, and possibly a renewal, and then tacking on a lodging tax.
I believe so. I believe we would certainly suggest that we consider those options, absolutely.
That's why Mark always came in, because he felt it was unfair that he was paying a lodging tax and all these other Airbnbs weren't paying lodging tax.
And for what it's worth, the reason why they weren't paying lodging taxes is because they weren't permitted.
Yeah.
And so, you know,
Well, I heard-
Mark was kind of actively and aggressively finding them and filing complaints with the town so that we would go and shut them down.
Yeah.
And when Mark stopped operating the inn and moved on to other things in life, that no one was coming to the town and alerting us to them, and we weren't constantly searching Airbnb and VRBO to identify if there were short-term rentals in town. There were times where we'd get a complaint from a neighbor, and that would alert us to the fact that that one was operating as a short-term rental, and we'd go through and identify those and any others we could find in town at the time, and we'd let them all know that they were not in compliance with the town's codes, and the easiest way for them to be in compliance would be to rent it for 30 days or more, and then they didn't have to deal with this.
So how did the board feel reasonably number two? Or are we leaning towards a 1 or a 3?
I think we should get the ball rolling rather than waiting for the state to fulfill something. I think we should at least get something moving so that when the state gets here, we've got fewer holes to plug. And maybe even have a policy in place and then, you know, kind of keep an eye on the process and then that way, we may already have a policy in place that complies with the state's new rules that they may or may not pass. But I think we gotta start now rather than wait.
I'm in favor of option 2. Is yours?
Yeah, I'm in favor of 2 as well.
Can we put,
and
sorry, if we don't have it up, then option number 2 was to the town adopt a reasonable and necessary regulation allowing STRs within town limits. Okay, we got it up now, thanks. Okay, so you're also in favor? Sorry.
No, yeah, and I mean, I just would ask staff to really focus on the issues that have been brought up in the past few meetings. It seems like enforcement and quick enforcement is a concern of everyone, both for the benefit of the neighbors and for the benefit of the owners. And that's just something that needs to be, I guess, the focus of any sort of regulation that would come down the pipe, just because that it seems like all of the secondary problems like use, parking, et cetera, are all related specifically to that ability to enforce and to enforce quickly and consistently, I guess with teeth as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm in favor of it because of a lot of the things that many people brought up, right? It's personal property, it's bringing income to the town with the right tenants. We don't even hear about these things, right? And it's unfortunate that it seems like because of certain tenants and because of their behaviors, some of the properties around town are suffering differently than others because of that specific issue.
Trustee Albrecht?
Yes, and I think this, like you said, we've discussed this as a missed opportunity as a board for a couple of years now. That we don't have lodging in Berthoud, and to be able to provide that for anyone who wants to come visit and enjoy the amazing town we have. And by not having a policy, we're actually creating more confusion than if we were to have a policy and I think the people here want to abide by town rules and want to do things correctly and have a clear way to do it with our partnerships. So I think by creating a policy, we're actually coming alongside them and then coming alongside homeowners and also saying we're not gonna create an environment where you don't wanna live in your home anymore or feel unsafe or unwelcome in this community either. The fact we have lodging tax in place already is something we don't even have to put into place because that's gonna benefit us immediately. Once these are, actually registered with the town, we'll be able to see that realized. And then one of my whys is if we want to see growth slow down, the best way to do that is to support our businesses through visits. if we have tourism and visitors coming into town, we have an influx of money coming back into the community, supporting our businesses, supporting our different facilities, and then, you know, they're not necessarily needing to stay, but they get to come and enjoy, and we get the benefit of those generated tax dollars, which we have really very little of at this point because we have zero lodging. So I just see an immense missed opportunity and a way to benefit our community and beautify it. And our businesses right now are especially suffering and have been for some time. And so I think of a lot of ways that this would feed into promoting our downtown and our other businesses. And if we need to create a staff position to facilitate that, we do a great job with code enforcement and making that role a community member. Our code enforcement officer does a good job. We're not penalizing people. She's not walking around trying to find people to punish. She's partnering with people in the community to just bring things up to code so that it's a beautiful place for us all to live. And I think if we could fund a new position, even somebody who's mapping out, hey, if we only allow one Airbnb per city block or something, just to keep things reasonable, then he or she's mapping that out and making sure that the whole thing is being a benefit to the community. I see opportunity, and if we wait for state legislation, I mean, who knows what that would look like, and I think that would be foolish personally. And I think it's really timely that we have a new town planner that has some historical knowledge to help guide us through what communities already have in place. We don't have to reinvent anything. We're not the first ones, and we can implement some things rather quickly. I don't think it's gonna take years. I think it could be 6 months before we have a good policy in place, personally. Sorry, that was
One
long.
other plus thing about tracking all this stuff is that maybe it would be enough cool data that would attract a hotel or motel scenario. They'll look at our Airbnb numbers and go, we gotta jump in on that too, and then we can attract a hotel.
That water too. So I agree. I think May, well put by all you guys actually. I'd like to do two. If things come along from the state, we can add it in or scratch whatever we were doing to accommodate it, but I wouldn't want to wait just on them. That bill might not even go through. I think we're all respectful of people opportunity that they've already been introduced into the STR world or we're considering it. And then also that the primary function of a community is with residential, considering that you'd be a citizen and live here, in my opinion. So I'm trying to balance that in my head still on, does it need to be owner occupied? Does the owner need to be in the area? Or is it just someone they know needs to be able to respond to an incident within 30 minutes or something? I guess my only things right now I'd like to really have us look into is contacting the two people in this room or keeping them a part of the conversation that are already involved in this stuff and already suggesting that we do regulations. If they're doing that for a living, we might not need to create a position if we could outsource some of this to them, just a thought. And I like Mr. Gavin's idea too, putting some of this on the providers, Airbnb, VRBO, all those guys. If they have the credit card information and we can somehow threaten them, or tell them that we're not gonna allow this if this keeps happening, maybe Airbnb is more likely to get on that host individually so it doesn't affect everyone else in the area. Considering that they reached out to the town, it might be receptive to us reaching out back and saying we'd like you part of the process. And then whoever brought up getting the HOAs and metros involved, I think we should contact them now and see if they have anything, what are their bylaws, and just let them know what we're doing. I think, and this is all speculation, but I think it's always gonna be the golf course getting hit the hardest, just being kind of a destination area. So that might be something that the metros consider going forward is do we wanna tighten this up a little more and be more expressly clear about not allowing STRs. It seems there's like a back and forth tonight on allowing that in that area. So I guess to sum it up, I'm in favor of the option 2, going ahead with regulations and just keeping in mind the state might have some changes to it.
Yeah, and sorry, on that note, to clarify once again, because this was brought up before, right? Any HOA or metro district can be more restrictive than any policy that the town puts in place. So if an HOA or metro district decides, if the community members of that district say, we do not want these in our district, they have that right as an individual entity to do that, correct?
They do, and it's important to understand, we do not and will not enforce those regulations. A good example is a lot of the HOAs and metro districts prohibit overnight parking on the street. Those are public streets, and we have no codes that require people to move their cars off the street. And we will not enforce those covenants or restrictions. And in some cases, I think we would even argue they don't have the legal right to do that, but that's a different, I won't get into that that nuanced discussion tonight, but just as an example, there are regulations that are stricter than our town codes. We will not enforce those at all.
And I would add to that, if in that case, moving forward, I think something to consider too as a part of the requirement on the planning end of it for an application, we would likely require a letter of confirmation from an HOA that they are permitted by the HOA. I mean, that's certainly something we can consider. Although, I mean, that only goes so far since we don't enforce, but it probably is just another added level of confirmation that their community or neighborhood at
I think
least
it's a good option.
allowed that.
Definitely
and that's
keep
not
those
uncommon.
communication ties open between our metro districts and our staff.
And that's not uncommon, like I know in the county, if you wanna construct an accessory dwelling unit in a zone that allows it, only because I went through this personally, like the county required me to provide evidence that my HOA said that was okay. And so that's not an uncommon requirement, to put that burden of proof on the applicant to say, yeah, I've already gotten approval from any other kind of jurisdiction that may have some authority here.
And I'm sorry to take up time, but as you brought that up again, I would like, as you suggested earlier, I think that it would be important for ADUs to remain as dwelling units and not necessarily part of any sort of policy that you guys put through, if you guys agreed with that, because of the housing situation.
Well, it could be addressed under a separate ADU policy, whether or not.
Or attainable housing
Well,
policy.
I don't know, in my, with hearing tonight, some of these people moved here just to get into their home early, or they didn't have another opportunity. So I wouldn't consider those necessarily tourists. It's another way for people to get in quickly but shortly, not having to sign a lease. The state's coming out with pretty significant ADU stuff this session too. So that's something but you're saying explicitly not allow, in this policy, developing not allowing STRs in an ADU? Is that what you're?
No.
I mean,
what was it? You were just wanting to exclude ADUs from the conversation?
I think yes, because I think that opens a whole other can of worms that might need to be addressed in a separate policy. However, I would leave that kind of up to y'all's
So generally, that is something you would include then in the short-term rental policy.
Okay.
So you can have just a simple statement that says,
ADUs are included or not.
short-term rentals are only allowed and, or one per property and ADUs cannot be used as a short-term rental.
Okay, then, yeah, if that was normal policy, I thought the way you had explained it, that was kind of
No,
like
you
a
don't
separate
have to do it
issue.
separately.
Okay.
Yeah, and certainly, for accessory structures or accessory dwelling unit, the language that we do have in the code, that could be part of the modification or amendment, is that we just also add language to that section for accessory dwelling units, as well as have it in short-term rental regulations, just so that it's clear if somebody's looking at just simply an accessory dwelling unit, they'd see it there and be like, okay, good to know for the future, kind of thing.
Because I know there's some houses built on Prairie Star that have accessory dwelling units above the garages. But I believe those are all mostly long-term rentals, not short-term.
Sometimes those are used as home offices or, whatever, but I think if the board would prefer to not allow short-term rentals and ADUs, it's an easy addition to a code. It's also an easy removal if it's a sentence or two that, as we go through this process, if that opinion changes for other reasons, that's fine too.
No, I didn't realize that it was
I'd like to-
already contained
Yep.
within the
Makes
issue, so.
It's in the issue, okay. Yeah, I'd like to keep, at least in my opinion, I'd like to keep that conversation going. It would allow, at least if there's some ownership on the property present, I think that's better than none at all.
Well, like if the owner's living in the house, they could short-term rental the thing, but they can't make both units.
You're right,
short-term rental.
yeah.
Right.
That's how I would view it.
Something like that, yeah.
It's like they can short-term rental one or the other, but not both at the same time.
Mayor, I had a question, or maybe just kind of a turn in the conversation. So obviously a pretty complex issue every time we, peel the onion back like ADUs, it gets more complex. So I wanted to ask staff, whether that's Tom or town administrator, a little bit about timing and what this might look like. And I guess where my head's at is there an appetite from the board, or is there anything we can do for the benefit of both neighbors and operators to do some sort of short-term policy that would have a sunset in like 6 months to 12 months while we work out a more nuanced policy that considers all these wrinkles?
I would suggest that we not do an interim policy that hasn't been well thought out. I think what we've learned the hard way is that it's a bit of a Pandora's box. Right now, the box is closed. And if we open that box and we haven't really figured out what to do with it, there's a high likelihood that the chaos might ensue. And I'm not sure that we want to do that again.
Sure, we shut it back down again.
And so I would suggest that we not do an interim policy unless, that said, I do think there is an option of saying, look, there's already some good examples of short-term rental regulations out there that other communities have vetted. They've been through that community public process at the county level, or a place like Timnath or somewhere else. We could bring a code to you that mirrors those, and you could say, look, we don't need to go through a public process and ask you if you want 2 cars in the driveway or 1 car in the driveway or 6 people out in the house or 8 people out in the house. To be honest, and I think we know, I think you recognize, because we've been through lots of these policymaking process, that part of the sausage making is the hardest part to get through.
Yeah.
And what it does is it prolongs what we end up doing, intentionally or unintentionally, is prolonging our ability to regulate and allow this with the hope that we get to some perfect regulation. The reality is, we also all know no regulation we adopt is going to be universally accepted or liked. It's also not going to be universally effective. We will, through the enforcement and regulation of that code, find problems over the next few years. We're going to come up with issues that we never could have foreseen that might be unique just to Berthoud. That happens in a lot of cases. And so there is the approach of just saying, look, there's some good examples out there, and we can debate those little details. We could do that for 2 years. I mean that sincerely and not in a sarcastic way at all. I'm not saying that this board would, but depending on how in depth you want to go with community conversation and debate over specifics, in order to try to get to some kind of perfect regulation, in the end, it'll take longer and we won't have a perfect regulation anyway. So we could adopt something much more quickly if we said, look, we're going to rely on some other codes. We're going to adopt some of those that we feel like fit for us.
We got Ton. I think that's the hybrid here.
Ton has an excellent amount of experience, both with drafting and being such an integral part of the county's process, but also just from doing an extensive amount of research during that process about what everybody else does. And so, again, I think we can propose a pretty workable regulation to the board that we could adopt relatively quickly. But that doesn't then open up, that changes the nature of that public process. Does it create a regulation that we can then implement, that we can start moving forward with, and then, identify issues as we go and try to correct those like we do with every other regulation anyway? Or do we want to craft that, go through, additional study sessions and board meetings and community meetings to try and make sure that that code reflects as best as possible what it is we want? I just think there's a balance there that the board can consider as we draft and bring a regulation to you.
Yeah, and that's kind of what was on my mind is, how far do we want to go crafting that perfect regulation versus being responsive, I guess.
I would agree, but there's also some time-sensitive issues here too, because Corn Ferry is going to be here before we know it. And I wouldn't mind having my pro golfer friends stay across the street from me again, because they're pretty entertaining guys to talk to, even though I'm not a golfer. Still had some water cooler talk with them. It's kind of interesting, but no, just other facts too. I think sooner the better, but quality. I'd rather go for quality than anything else.
I agree with quality, because my concern is if we implement something there's gonna be a standard and an expectation from the community at that point. So to change it or to revert on it, I think will cause more issue. Like, one of my biggest concerns is the density issue. Like we heard in Heron Point that there's multiple rentals on one block. And I don't know, I love Airbnbs, but if I had to live next to more than one, I probably wouldn't wanna live in my neighborhood anymore because I wouldn't have those relationships with my community like I do my neighbors. I love having that community dynamic, which I appreciated in this presentation because that's something we don't talk a lot about, is to know your neighbors and to grow up with them and grow old with them too is a big deal. So I think the density is a big deal, and if we don't have that structure in place, if we change that down the road, we can't really go back on that without a huge outcry. I'm sure there's a lot of layers to that, like certain standards and regulations that if we change later is gonna hurt these businesses that already have a model set up. And so I want to expedite by using some other ideas that are already out there, but not forsake, the quality we need specifically for birthing. So maybe compare, contrast Estes, Timnath, Larimer County, give us those layouts and we can, take a meeting to say, here's how we want to adopt these into Berthoud and give the community a meeting to have input on that, and we can adopt a policy. I don't think it needs to be as extensive as some of our other development codes and policies we've had discussions over, but I don't wanna rush it and regret.
Yeah,
what we came up with.
that's where that software program could show us the density issue rather easily without a lot of training for staff.
So I can say that just from my experience, certainly I think there are numbers that are very consistent across the board. So like for instance, what will be the limit or the maximum, say the 2 guests per bedroom. That's a pretty consistent number, I would say, across the board. So I think to Chris's point is that I think there are some regulations that that we could easily develop into some regulations without much conversation, just because it is. You can look at Timnath, you can look at, Estes Park, you can go, Colorado Springs or as far as Grand Junction, and you'll see that there's that consistency there. But I do have to say that I have to forewarn you that when it comes to implementing a buffer or a cap or some kind of limitation per neighborhood, it certainly has positive effects, but it is a challenge to come up with what is the appropriate way to put up that cap. What is the appropriate way to determine what percentage is correct for one neighborhood over another neighborhood? Or going by zone district to zone district. It is an incredible challenge, and certainly we can provide you with some discussion in the first draft about, okay, here's one option and here's another option, but do be prepared that is, I think, out of all the things that we considered at Larimer County, and it was extensive, from everything from wildfire hazard areas to floodplains to there was an extensive, I think, trying to determine cap or buffer was by far one of the hardest things that we were up against.
Yeah, cause I can picture a homeowner buying a house, thinking, oh, I'm gonna buy this as an investment property. They buy a house for $1 million or $800,000, whatever current market is in those certain areas. And then they go apply for their permit and say, nope, sorry, we've already got 2 on your street.
And that's certainly a risk, and that's of course doing due diligence prior to purchasing the property would be advisable. But it's more like, so in the case of, okay, so you have individuals currently who have short-term rentals, and so the moment we adopt regulations, likely we would see that they'll be first ones through the door with an application. So then all of a sudden you have people who are racing each other, who are neighbors, pitting neighbor against neighbor, to come in and say, well, I got my application in first, but you have a 500-foot buffer, so that means my neighbor, who is my good friend and everything else, all of a sudden there's this conflict. And so of course we as the town don't necessarily want to see that. So those are just those, so when I say that, this is potentially can take, as much as we would like this to be an expedited process, which I can value that for the community and getting this up and running, there are unforeseen conversations and complexities to what we will be discussing that can tack on quite a bit of time, just because we want a fair policy in place. And we wanna make sure that we do vet every option so that we aren't creating issues for, neighbor against neighbor for the community nor for ourselves. So when it comes to a cap, it is very challenging. When it comes to tracking, we highly rely then on GIS data. So certainly we have ArcGIS, we use it, but again, we don't have staff that is completely committed to GIS. So that's creating heat maps. So knowing that every address that has been approved for a short-term rental, then you have to put it into Excel spreadsheets and then you have to create data layers. And all those data layers are then connected, and so that you constantly have to keep that updated, so when applications come through, you're keeping track of whatever that distance buffer is, density. So there is a lot that goes into that, so I would just forewarn you, out of my experience, that is probably by far one of the most difficult things to consider. It's sometimes easier, like Timnath currently has cap in place and they base it off of certificate of occupancies. But of course, and like Berthoud, that's certainly an option we could take a look at. So when you have newer communities, that's a bit easier because they're coming in, and so it's based on, it's 1%. So 1%, you have 100 certificate of occupancies, there you go, that's that. But again, it can probably potentially have foreseen difficulties, and I'm happy to have those conversations with those communities to get an idea.
Well, you do have the background, and talking to you prior to this, you've been kind of candid on what works in your opinion and what doesn't, and everyone's gonna have an opinion on something or other. I do trust why something in your mind won't work. Maybe from the board here, just having that written out, why that might not be the ideal
Absolutely.
draft.
Yeah.
But from our perspective, I think what we're looking for is number 2 here.
Yeah, something that works.
So
I do think we need to consider that lodging tax should support and fund the role of managing, because if we're allowing them, we need proper management
We need
and oversight
revenue
and
stream.
enforcement, and so I think we should consider those funds should be allocated for managing, because we'll be generating those funds new that we haven't been before, and it'd be best use of those, and I mean, that's just something to consider.
Should pay for its enforcement.
Well, and I put some of that on the annual and renewal and the application permit fee too.
And fines.
Fines. I'd like to use some of that for economic development stuff, not for managing the own issue, but I do see the point. Anyway, that stuff, we can.
Yeah,
When
it
we
shouldn't
get
be
a
a burden
hotel,
on the town, it
lodging
shouldn't be a
tax will
burden on
go
the neighbors.
Yeah,
Short-term rental shouldn't be a burden on anybody.
no, certainly. Okay, are we all happy? Did that clear as mud?
Absolutely. I think I definitely, that gives me a direction, and I think there are some solid numbers out there that we can easily get going, and then the bigger conversations, we can focus on those.
And for the folks in the room here, it wouldn't go immediately to taking action on something. There'd likely be another study session, and then whatever ordinance, there'd be a first and second reading. So there'll be plenty more opportunities for public input. In the meantime, reach out to any of us on the board here, reach out to Chris or Ton. We'd like to hear from it. We can pass it on to other trustees to read too, if you don't wanna email everyone. All right, thank you. Larry Hildebrand on that. Are we all right moving straight into affordable housing?
Should we take a 5-minute break here?
Sure, let's take a 5-minute break.
Can we fix the clock soon so that
Thank
it's
you.
10 o'clock?
Thank you.
And that clock is wrong, so it is not almost 10 o'clock.
I just wanted to mention that
I was wondering about that.
available,
I figured that's- Treats? Someone's telling me I got a belly.
I think this item would be a lot simpler and quicker.
And promise me.
Yeah, that's something Anne and I want. Treats in your ears is the bill.
That time is right now. It's right twice a day, every day.
I tell my wife, you guys are all come off is right.
That's right.
Felt like it.
No, it's definitely the
I like to
time.
think it's right. All
Oh.
times.
Oh, gotcha.
There you go.
John, are we gonna go?
I'm
from. You're my right. You're my right.
I'll look at my
The Chino, okay, yeah. There you go. My German is Swiss German and French much better.
Yeah, mine not so much.
Ready to go? Even with that donut in front of you?
Sitting over there.
Okay, it's been good. Alright. Alright, I'm gonna call this meeting back to order and we're gonna hit our second and final agenda item tonight, and that'll be the affordable housing discussion, and this will be introduced by our Community Development Director, Ann Johnson.
So this discussion potentially could go very differently than our last discussion. Both subjects have, I can't remember which of you, trustee, if it was Ayers or Kurt said, a multi-layered onion. Housing is very complex. When you look at the subject of affordable housing, just on the surface, yes, we all want anybody who wants to live in Berthoud to be able to live in Berthoud. But then when you really start peeling back those layers of what makes affordable housing, it's access to mass transit, it's access to medical facilities, it's access to, paying your bills by being able to walk to town hall. So there are so many different variables, including why does it cost so much money? The supply chain issues. So there are all of these issues and a lot of those we can't control. But what we can control is working with others that know the housing industry and help us control what we can. So just really quickly, one of the things that we need to understand is who we are in Berthoud. And part of that is, let me see here. Christian, can you just remind me how to get this on here? I am so sorry.
The little laser pointer.
Oh, okay, now it's up there. Thank you. Thanks. So,
Then we can sing along.
yeah, everybody, here we go. So new residential building permits per year. This does go back to 2015, and you can see we really spiked in 2020. We stayed up there in 2021. 2022 was less than half of what we were in 2021 and 2020. And then in 23, this is as of the end of September, so there were 3 more months to go. We were at 144 new residential building permits. Now I know in 1 week, for a couple weeks running, we did receive 20 in a week. So this number will go up. It may be close to where we were last year, but it's definitely not where we have been. And a lot of that is market conditions, right? And interest rates and all of those other variables, again, that we cannot control. So right now, we are guesstimating that the town of Berthoud has about 4,800 residential units available. In the development review process right now, we have 2,700 residential units that are somewhere being reviewed, either in the platting stage or in the neighborhood master planning stage. And then recently approved but not constructed yet is Farmstead's second filing. And so in total, we have about 3,300, 3,300, had to check planner math there, residential units or lots that are on their way to being able to be constructed upon. So that's where we are today. Now you have a copy of the state demographer's wonderful community profile. We're not gonna go over this in depth tonight at all, but it is provided to you to read and understand a little bit of the variables behind housing and just a little bit of history about Berthoud. So right now, our population was 11,093. That was with, I believe, the 2020 census. Right now, they're saying that there are 4683 new residential units since 2015. That was just adding that column. There are 2.61 persons per household. So we have a total of 4762 housing units. The median income is nearly $96,000. So that's the largest group of that big bunch, that big spread. It's not the average, but it's that median. And then 2.9% of our population though is living below that poverty line. And the poverty line, I have it on the next slide here from Larimer County. And then owner occupied, paying more than 30% of their income on housing. That's when somebody becomes cost burdened for housing. That's that tipping point where someone might be needing to make a decision to do something different with housing. So if you're paying more than 30% of your income, that's a problem. And then there are some renters that are paying nearly 46% of renters are paying more than 30% of their income on housing. And affordable housing means that households that earn less than 80% of the area median income spend more than 30% of their income on housing, and that means they're cost burden. Attainable housing are households that earn between 80 and 120% AMI, and they should not be spending more than 30% of their income on housing. So I know this is really small, but again, this is Larimer County. This is the poverty line. If you are a single individual, you're making $22,500, so that's about $11 an hour. You and your one individual, you are living at that poverty line. Now, if you are one individual living by yourself and you're making $37,600, so that's about what?
50.
Yeah, thank you. You are at the 50%, and so that is the affordable housing level. And then if you are at 80%, you're making $60,100, and that is you are at the bottom of the attainable housing. And so that's the area median income for Larimer County in 2022. So that's just, again, a snapshot of where we are today and really what we're going to start looking at. And that area median income, that slides. As you can see, the more people you have in your family, that income does get greater because that's how much money you need to support that number of people living in your household. So we opted into Proposition 123 to help our housing partners. Part of where I'd like us to go is we really do need to have somebody come in and help us from that outside expert level to give an assessment of what do we have in stock? What is the market? What is the marketability? If Berthoud wanted to have a big affordable housing project, where would it go? Where are the services to support individuals that would be living in those homes? Do we have what we need? And then what does our code allow? So there has to be a marriage between the code. The code is kind of like a cafeteria plan. You want to do this and you're in this zone district, okay, we can help you by this method. So our code can have all of the opportunities that would allow affordable housing, but if the market can't support that, what are the reasons why the market can't support that? Is there something that the town can do for water taps, sewer taps, infrastructure, some of those things? But then what are the variables outside of our control that we can't do anything about? And I think understanding what we can do versus what we can't do will help us go a long way to speak intelligently about affordable housing and what it means to Berthoud. So there is a grant coming up, it's due December 1st. I've been speaking with Chris LeMay, and he thinks that
He's
it
with
would be-
DOLA? That was
Yeah,
it,
he's
yeah.
our DOLA rep, yeah,
Okay,
he's a wonderful wealth of information. He suggested that we might want to consider having a third-party expert come on in and help us do that housing needs assessment to review the market analysis to determine what is absorbable, might not be a word,
Yeah,
but at
sound-
this,
sounded
at
good.
this late in the time, my brain's
Made it work.
oatmeal. And then a review of our land development code to determine, are there ways that we can make things faster? Are there ways that we can make things more transparent and encourage all types of housing? And then also to streamline development review processes. So with that, if we do pursue that funding cycle, I think I have to have a resolution of support, so you might be seeing that on November 28th. And then really there isn't anything negative towards Touchstones. It would just pursuing this outside view of our community. It really will help us determine how can we be more resilient, how can we be sustainable, and how can we enhance community identity, those major touchstones, just by offering that wide range of housing products. And the answer may be, Berthoud, you're doing everything you can do. We're not Fort Collins, Longmont, Boulder, we're not Denver, we don't have all of those major services. However, maybe the housing study will say you need to have more services in town in order to support the individuals that would be living in those units. So then maybe we go out and we talk to Larimer County or somebody else and try to recruit them to open up a satellite office here. Now, I can't make any guarantees about the success that we'll have there, but at least we'll know what are the supportive services that we need to have affordable housing, to have attainable housing. So I gave you all that grid information, and now that really concludes what I wanted to say, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I like your two definitions.
Yeah, that was good, and having the incomes with it. I'd be awesome as part of this DOLA thing is we do, if we could just let DOLA know or whoever this person is, that Loveland Housing Authority has reached out and willing to help, so that they know there might be a house, even though we don't have a housing authority in Berthoud, there's others that have expressed interest in helping us.
That's wonderful, and I don't think Berthoud, with the size of Berthoud, I don't think we want a housing authority. And that this individual, whoever we end up retaining, if we're successful with this grant, it's going to be competitive. And it's coming from the Energy and Mineral Impact Fund pot, and we're not really impacted much, but I'm still gonna try.
Yeah, like you're saying, these
You
are
don't
severance
apply, you don't
taxes, kind of?
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but there are partners, there are a housing authority, there is, Habitat for Humanity, there are other independent builders that will build a product. And so it will be nice just knowing who those partners are.
Yeah, and if we get this grant, the Life Center put on by House Neighborly Service, that's one of their primary goals is to offer spaces for those
Oh, good.
parties to come through. So like
Bring
Summit
an
Stone
office.
for healthcare and
Loveland
SNAP
has
stuff.
an authority, Berthoud.
Those are only 2 points, but otherwise I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, this was a big topic at CML back in May, so.
What do you estimate that's to cost if we didn't get the grant? If we could just fund this out of pocket?
I'm guessing $100,000. And I am gonna go look on their last funding cycle to see who they funded and what they funded and how much they're guesstimating. So that can be my guesstimate as well.
I wonder if this new bill, because I just sent that link out, I don't know how they're changing things, but it would make sense that the legislature opens up more dollars for these housing assessments. So if we didn't get this one, maybe there's an opportunity coming up pretty quick.
Right, I'm hoping so, and I know that we missed the IHOP grants and the IHOY grants were a
There's an
couple years.
IHOP grant?
International House of
IHOP and IHOY, they were a couple of years ago, and that was when the really big push through some of the recovery money came into the state. But, you know, we just, it wasn't as prevalent as it is
No,
today in Berthoud, so.
Oh, that'd be good. I'm glad we're going.
It's IHOY, not Ahoy, right?
Yeah, it was IHOY and IHOP.
And IHOP, wow. Good act,
Yeah.
you were not
So,
gonna forget that
but now,
acronym.
yeah, but now we have a bigger pot of money available because you have signed on to Proposition 123. So now we have hundreds of millions of dollars that would be available either for land banking, maybe even water banking, all of these opportunities. And Chris and I are going to have lunch with Habitat for Humanity, and we're gonna talk about how we go forward to help them.
Do you have access, I'm sure you do, but have you gone and reviewed some of the CML presentations that were on attainable housing? Because there were some good ones, I think who'd you just mention from DOLA?
Chris LeMay.
Yeah, okay, I couldn't remember his name, short-term memory's bad. I think he was one of the presenters at one of the things that I attended, his
Wonderful.
name sounds familiar, but
He's
anyway,
bald like me.
the PowerPoint presentations were pretty good. We're talking about all these facts and figures, and they talked about the multi-dwelling units where they were building on a regular house lot, like a primary house up front, and then like 2, 4, or 6 smaller units in the back that they were renting out to help kind of offset their share and kind of sharing that lot cost of, you know, water permits and sewer permits. They were detached, but I'm sure they could do kind of a
Well, you're not like
an
a pocket
attached sort of
neighborhood.
thing. Yeah, just like
Yeah.
little pocket neighborhoods, but they're building them on standard size lots, which was kind of interesting, or even like a double lot. They were even talking about how some communities were doing the land banking, where the town was actually buying the land and then giving it to a developer so that they could still build a smaller home and have their profitability, because it all comes down to profit, it's all dollars and cents. Builders don't wanna build anything unless they're gonna make money at it, so. And then we discovered the last time Habitat was here asking for their waivers, that what was the little law that we can't like completely
Well, it's just an enterprise zone. I don't know, would you be looking
zero
at that?
out their sewer and water things, they still have to pay a minimal fee or something like that, cause there's some.
We did look into the impact fee question. And we can waive impact fees. There is an exemption in the state law specifically for affordable housing.
Okay. So that's good to know now that we've got some clarification on that, but I think we've just definitely gotta put the donut out there to encourage these builders to build these products, because when I was on planning commission and even here, I see these plats come through and it's like there's just McMansion after McMansion, 800,000, 900,000, $1 million homes being built, but there's nothing being built in that $300,000-$200,000 range. And I
Yeah.
know it's possible because you see them built elsewhere in the country.
Sure.
But why it's not possible here, everyone always says supply and demand, the market value is driving those prices up, material costs are higher here supposedly, I don't know.
The benefit that we have is that we're not the first ones out of the gate.
Yeah.
There are lots of examples throughout the country and internationally that we can rely on to Berthoudize a solution that works best for the town. And not all solutions are gonna work for us, but we can find out what is best in practice, what has worked for a community either of similar size, similar demographics, similar location to services. We'll have access to that information and can come up with some clever solutions that will work for Berthoud, and talk about congestion and crowding, and definitely we want the school district to be involved, and you know, all of the other special districts, the library district, the community college district. Get lots of people involved to talk about this issue. There isn't a magic solution, unfortunately. We just have to do what's going to be best for Berthoud.
I think that in this I think we're all in agreement, this housing needs will start that conversation. We know how bad the problem is, where it is. Do you think it'll cover, so I'm just surprised by the state demographer, the amount of information we could get on the town. It seems like if we could get this information, there's a way to know how many are actually owned and owner occupied and how many are just rentals. Cause I've heard we have a lot of rentals. Does the
There-
state demographer cover that?
There's some from the census that they get that.
Okay.
One of the other things that I'm wanting to do as we are slowly digitizing all of our files, I'm wanting to find out how many platted lots do we have and what is truly vacant and what is built, constructed upon, so that we know, do we, do we have 5,000 lots that are 10,000 square feet in size or larger out there? Is our market the 5,000 feet and under lot? So that we have a better understanding of some of that as well. I don't know if we're going to have all of those details through this housing needs assessment.
No, that's just
But
good.
it's a tool that I want to develop
Yeah,
as well, just
yeah.
a better understanding of who birthed it.
For example, met a girl at the golf course who lives over at Heron Point, and she was just bringing up to me how many rentals that never went on the market. So the developer straight up, they're somehow owned and rented by the developer, and she was talking about how that tears her neighborhood up. So this kind of relates to the previous conversation, but she doesn't know their neighbors because they're always in and out. So if we could get how many we have in town from the state demographer, I don't know if that's, you don't even have to write it down because that might not be an affordability issue. It's just interesting to know when we talk.
Well, that all sounds like a titling thing, you probably go pull up and like the map in the office, you can see the person's name on the lot. How many houses in a row have the same last name?
Yeah,
Right
okay,
now.
well, I can look at it in my own time. It's just great to know that the state's offer, or the state demographer keeps up on a lot of this. Do we need to get have you thought about getting the letters of support resolutions from Habitat, from House Neighborly Service? to
I'm
help us out?
I'm sure I would get letters of support. I wanted to come and ask you all
Makes sense.
first and just say, this is how I'd like to approach it.
Yeah.
If you wanted to say, no, we want you staff to do it all themselves, of course, we would look at that, but I think this is the best step
Yeah,
forward
yeah.
on this big
I
issue.
agree.
And then, yes, I will reach out to House of Neighborly Services, probably Loveland, Housing Authority, Habitat for Humanity, the school district, others that are impacted by this housing issue.
I had a quick question, just if there were any sort of strings attached to the grant money that might be, I don't know, on the negative side in terms of pursuing the grant. Doesn't sound like it's of a dollar value that there would be, but just kind of curious.
No, just deliver your project on time and don't ask for more money.
Okay, gotcha. Don't ask for more money, okay.
Yeah, don't ask for more. If you run over, tough.
Oh, okay, sorry, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying.
Be home on time and don't ask for more money.
Yeah, so the Energy and Mineral Impact Grant Program is that way, and then he also suggested that I look at a Division of Housing grant too. So I'm gonna look at both of those.
Awesome.
That's one thing I love
Fantastic.
at CML, that there's a lot of money that goes unspoken for because people aren't applying for them. So,
There are a
I'm
lot
glad-
of people at the town. We like to, Chris has a good team of people that like to write grants. It's just,
They're coming about now, it's great.
administering them and
I'll tell you, there was a time we had a town
regulations.
administrator that was expressly anti-grant and they just take up time. There was people that fought us on the Safe Routes to School grant. That was $400,000. I'm glad we turned that corner.
Yeah, I mean,
You were in favor of safe routes?
No, it's just too much pain to manage all this and it's not.
Yeah, administering grants, there's a break, going after a $10,000 grant and you have to spend 100 hours administering
sure.
that grant, that's silly.
Yeah.
But there are grants, and then you also have to consider you're hiring a consultant, and hiring a consultant is oftentimes twice as time consuming as staff is, because they're not here all the time.
Makes
And
sense.
it's keeping everybody on track and on schedule and on budget and making sure the deliverables are done, and I can go on and on, but I won't.
To be clear, this was a different town administrator. I was not just cloak dagger stabbing you in the back.
No,
okay?
I knew that.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, I understand that perspective too, cause
I think you hit it on the head. It's a
Really
dollar amount
challenging
and
grants,
what's the
yeah.
grant say? Is it saying we need to come back with a report and all this detail, or is it just you need to make sure there's no embezzlement?
and we've struggled with there are grants that not that this is a grant conversation, but there are grants that have, because of other regulatory red tape we gotta get through, have extended projects out 2 or 3 years that we could have just paid cash for.
Yeah.
And so, there's a time delay, even if it
And
doesn't
CDOT.
cost us more, and those are a little frustrating, but
I can.
in general, if we can get other people's money to improve our town, we should.
Why not?
Yeah. or get more of our money back. I guess it just depends on how you wanna look at it.
Get developers money. Pay for it.
This sounds like an awesome first step. Like we need to do this no matter where we go. I'm very excited about this, and even if we don't get this, it sounds like there's opportunities down the road, and maybe it's something we just need to budget in, but
No, that's where we
Gotta start
rewrite
here.
the candy bowl of our development plan where they have to build so many different products instead of just one. We can maybe throw this in there, be another one that, hey, here's another product you can throw in.
Yeah.
That's this.
yeah, part of that
Uh,
scorecard.
It gives you more brownie points if you do this versus doing just a pocket park or something like that, but.
Yeah, and I mean, and there's deed restrictions, there are legal things that then have to be considered on top of that. So it's how to administer and what is in the best interest. So again, it's onions, it's like what Shrek said, he's like an onion, they're multi-layers. So this is our Shrek.
Yeah.
That's the problem with affordable or attainable housing is that you might build a product that, yeah, we built it in, we could sell it right off the gate at, $250,000. And all of a sudden they become really desirable, and next thing you know, they're $700,000 homes too. They just, because that's how Mary's Farm started out, oh, we're gonna build this neighborhood, all the homes are gonna be $189,000. And now you go over there and they're going for 5 and 6.
Yes, how do you not
do
only
you keep
build
it?
it, but keep it that way? Okay, so that's it,
Does
unless
that
you have
sound
more
supportive? Everyone in support of that?
I'm in support. I was just gonna
Yeah.
say, I was thinking about this issue and I appreciate the 30,000-foot view of the situation and getting that expert opinion. And I was just thinking about if there's any way to pursue affordable housing in a way that we're really looking at the demand within our community and meeting the needs of current residents as the primary focus versus creating a product that draws outsiders to come live affordably in Berthoud. If there's a way to focus on the internal demand and serve our existing citizens, that's really my heart for our community. Is not that we create a community that's affordable living for people to come move to, but more so there's people in our community that are being priced out of it. Like our firefighters, our senior citizens and teachers, and it's becoming unaffordable to live here even if they've lived here for many years. So if there's a way to tailor a program to meet those demands for our citizens first, and I don't know how you do that, but that was just something I was mulling over when I was thinking about this issue.
And that's very smart to think that way, and even individuals like my husband and I, unless one of the kids comes home again, we're empty nesters
Oh,
now.
you just jinxed yourself. They are
I
now.
know, it's like,
You're
yes.
boomerang kids. You throw them out and they come right back.
California's coming home, that's great, I'll let her know. That we can't afford to buy down now.
Yeah.
So we're kind of stuck where we are until we need to, I don't know.
Isn't that interesting?
It's pretty sad that your house is now down because your mortgage is small, but if you were to
Interest
sell,
rates,
you
right?
couldn't buy something smaller because the smaller place is no more expensive than the place you're living in.
Exactly, and and that creates a very unique situation as well, because our home would open up for a
Right.
family to move in, yet we can't afford to move out.
Yeah.
So there are all of those situations too that complicate the affordability factor.
I can see that in Old Town with big houses too. I think it's a problem. We need to create instead of an age-in place, like create an age-in community. So there's always somewhere for that next step. In my opinion, you hit it right on the head.
And that's where the schools talk about how they're having issues with the schools, why they have to close down schools in some neighborhoods, cause those people can't afford to move out, so new families can move in. So the schools have to move.
I guess one point of reference to your point is I have a friend who lives in a resort community in another state, and they have essentially an affordable housing program out of necessity because it's like, it's Teton County, Wyoming, right? So it's like $2 million, $3 million, like the average price of a home. So they essentially operate under a point system, and you get points for longevity, you get points for if you work for like the school
Working-
district, fire
yeah.
district.
Workforce
like,
housing.
Yeah, kind of. And so it's kind of like, not that everybody's familiar with hunting, but you get preference points, you build up these, this pile, and every year they look at the available affordable housing, and you get to throw your points essentially in a lottery. And then obviously the more points you have because you've been there for 5 years versus 1 year, or you work for the school and versus
Yeah.
You're a remote worker or something like that.
I love this.
It all kinda.
Sounds like the opposite of a lottery for short-term rentals or capping on that, like, we want this one, not yet.
But yeah, so they kind of incentivize like a community first mindset.
Yeah.
In their affordable housing.
So it's intrinsic value in your community, like that I feel like we are at risk of losing because of the cost of living here. And so if there's a way to keep them local, and most of our firefighters, I think when I was at the fire station, there was one family that could afford to live here 5 years ago. And so that's where I'm like, if we could keep that at the forefront of our mind, and that's so cool. I didn't know that those programs even existed.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So I guess maybe my ultimate point is, so look at when we do this needs assessment, and I think we're kind of more talking about the solution side versus the need side, but it might behoove us to look at communities that aren't exactly like Berthoud, like a resort community, because they've been dealing with this for a lot longer, and had to be creative, so.
I saw another example of a
Yeah.
community where the town just could not find that carrot to encourage developers to come in. So they started land banking, they became the developer, they created the neighborhood, and because they weren't out to make 7 times markup on the cost of the house, they were doing kind of a rent to own scenario where the properties were deed restricted, but the people could move in, basically pay for it, and then there was 2 ways it could have gone. They could have owned the house that they were in, or there was a way that the rent that they were paying was actually adding up to a down payment so they could go buy a house elsewhere. And then that house would open up again to the next person to get their start, to save up, to then buy their house. So it was like transitional housing was another example of how that was working, and that was the only way they could get it to work because the town wasn't about the profit, they were about taking care of the citizens and getting them into housing.
Awesome. So we all agree? Seems like a good thing to direct staff to go ahead.
thank you so much.
Keep on keeping on.
Anything else? It sounds pretty straightforward, so that's awesome. So December 1st, we send it in, and when would we know back?
Probably February, March time.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Right.
Great first step. I'm gonna head and adjourn the meeting. Good night.
No public comments.
But no, oh my gosh, yes, let's open it back up.
No, just real quick.
Do you have anything to say? Yeah, please.
Matthew Gavin, 30
you, I could be making that totally
It
up.
makes sense.
and
You did a good job.
It's just, I'm going off the cuff.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Okay, cool.
There was a presentation on the third day at CML that talked about the Vale Eagle one, and they featured one of their police officers who was like commuting in to work his job, and they built this workforce housing, and he was able to get his family into a home. He'd lived
Yeah,
in the
okay.
valley all his life.
It's more of a resort type thing, I
Yeah.
guess, in here.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
It
Well,
was a good
I
story.
mean, yeah, I think the issue still exists here, but it's like, if they don't have a workforce, they don't have a resort. So
Right.
I guess there's more money at stake, I guess
Yeah,
I would say,
yeah.
so they had to figure something out.
Yeah, the town has to invest.
Cool, well, I'm gonna go ahead and adjourn the meeting again. Thank you for clarifying that.